Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere no tourist guide ever really takes you. Past the shiny, postcard-ready gates of the Forbidden City, behind those red lacquered doors with golden studs, and straight into the private quarters of the Emperor, not to see him, but the women whose lives were built around waiting for him. You're about to learn what it actually meant to be a concubine in one of the most lavish prisons in the world. Spoiler, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and what time it is right now. I love knowing who else is wide awake with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the Meridian Gate, the main entrance to the Forbidden City. The stone beneath your feet is ancient, smooth from centuries of ceremonial parades, Imperial commands, and the silent shuffle of thousands of palace staff who weren't allowed to speak unless spoken to. The sky overhead is grey, not with weather, but with silence, the kind that sits heavily between massive walls and centuries of secrets. It doesn't matter if you're walking in as a commoner, a noble, or a daughter of some ambitious family. If you've been summoned here as a potential concubine, your identity is already fading behind silk veils and protocol scrolls. Now look around. What you see is only a fraction of the actual city, over 980 buildings, 90 palace quarters, and more rooms than any single person could count in a lifetime. Hidden within are the inner courts, where men weren't allowed except for one, the Emperor. And hundreds, sometimes thousands of women lived in those chambers, not for love, not even for choice, but to serve as symbols of loyalty, fertility, and sometimes simply decoration. You've just entered a world built on hierarchy, surveillance, and a kind of quiet desperation so intense it gets passed down in whispers. As you're led through these gates, a eunuch gives you a side glance. He's been here longer than you've been alive, maybe. His face is unreadable, but his eyes follow you closely, not in curiosity, but calculation. Your value is being weighed before you've even spoken. You smell the faint trace of incense, lacquer, and, beneath it all, something dry and old, like dust trapped in velvet for too long. They take you past the outer palaces where the Emperor meets his ministers, and toward the women's quarters. You pass through multiple doors, each one more ornate, but somehow more claustrophobic. There's a garden, and it's absurdly beautiful. A koi pond, peonies in bloom, a tiny bridge curved like a dancer's back, but it feels more like a movie set than a real play. It's all there to be looked at, not lived in. You arrive at a hall known simply as the Hall of Benevolent Tranquility. Name's a bit of a joke. It's where incoming concubines are brought to begin their life of imperial service, starting with having their names registered, their family details verified, and yep, their virginity confirmed. You're no longer Lan or Xiao Zhen or whatever your parents named you. You're now Lady of the 9th rank, just one among many. This place runs on rules, rituals, and rumours, and the first thing you learn? Everything you do will be recorded by someone. Not just what you say, but how you smile, when you frown, and especially who notices. You eat when told, walk when summoned, and speak only when it's absolutely necessary. One wrong step and you might be reassigned to menial labour, or worse, transferred to an outer compound, which is basically a soft exile. You don't want to know what happens after that. Most don't come back. The older concubines, the ones who've survived long enough to gain titles and private rooms, watch you from behind beaded curtains. One raises a fan slowly to cover her mouth and whispers something to another. You're not supposed to hear it, but you do. Too thin, she won't last through winter. It hits you then. You're not in competition with one another. You're in competition with time, with favour, and with death. Here's the historical fact to hang on to. During the Qing dynasty, the number of women living in the Forbidden City could range from a few hundred to nearly 2,000 at any one time, depending on the emperor's preferences and political needs. Only one man had access to them all. And here's the fringe fact that historians still puzzle over. It's said that some emperors, like the Yongzheng emperor, were so disinterested in the harem that concubines could go years, decades even, without being summoned. One woman reportedly lived in the palace for 50 years without once being called to the emperor's bed. She died a virgin, surrounded by luxury, completely untouched. But scholars don't agree on everything. There's debates about whether some concubines found ways to assert influence or build personal empires behind the scenes. Did they wield power through art, poetry, or even covert alliances with eunuchs? Or is that a romantic fantasy layered over centuries of silence? All you know right now is that you're tired and yet wide awake. The bed is soft but cold. You lie there wondering if this is the beginning of glory or the slow erasure of everything you were. Your hair smells like jasmine oil. Somewhere beyond the lattice windows, a flute plays a single trembling note. You're told you'll meet the Empress tomorrow. You've heard the rumours that she can read a girl in 10 seconds and decide her fate with a tilt of the head. You close your eyes, not to sleep but to hide, because you're not dreaming. You're inside the Forbidden City now, and it's very real. Morning arrives not with sunlight but with footsteps, soft, slippered, purposeful, the kind of sound that's more unnerving than loud boots could ever be. You open your eyes and find a maid already pulling back the embroidered curtains of your canopy bed, her face blank, her hands efficient. She doesn't speak. No one has said a word to you yet. You're not sure if you're being observed or simply ignored. Both are dangerous in their own way. A basin of rose-scented water appears before you. Your hair is brushed, your face dabbed, your clothes changed. Every move is made for you, not with you. You're led through a side corridor toward the main courtyard. There's no grand hall, no audience chamber. Just a line of girls about your age. Maybe a little younger, a few a little older. Everyone looks terrified but trying not to. They all wear nearly identical dresses, hairpins that seem too ornate for such anxious faces. It's selection day. Again, because here's the thing, you were chosen to enter the Forbidden City, but that's only phase 1. Now the real choosing begins. The Emperor isn't here, of course. He's probably still asleep in a different wing of the city, maybe still entertaining one of his higher-ranking concubines. This stage of selection isn't about romance or attraction. It's bureaucracy with a floral scent. High-ranking officials and palace matrons move down the line, marking scrolls, whispering evaluations. Each girl's posture, teeth, skin, and even demeanour are noted and judged. One girl sneezes. She's immediately pulled out of the line by 2 eunuchs, vanishing behind a curtain. You never see her again. This is how it works. The Imperial Court held elections for concubines, known as xuannu, every few years, especially during the Qing dynasty. Girls between the ages of 13 and 17 were brought in from noble and sometimes common families, depending on the political climate. Your family might have spent years preparing you, teaching court etiquette, memorizing poetry, bleaching your skin with rice water, only to be rejected for having a slightly crooked nose or too prominent a freckle. And the kicker, once you entered the palace, you couldn't go home. Ever. Even if you were rejected, you stayed behind palace walls. Your name struck from public records. You existed now only within the inner court. One official pauses in front of you. His eyes narrow. He's not the Emperor, but he might as well be. He could scribble the character for unsuitable on your card, and that would be the end of it. But after a pause, he nods slightly. Approval. A small, severe-looking woman behind him taps her brush and makes a note. You're still in the game. Later, in the shade of a winding corridor, you overhear something strange. 2 palace maids talking in hushed tones, one saying a girl last year pretended to faint so she wouldn't be chosen. Not because she feared rejection, but because being accepted meant living a life so controlled that it made the outside world seem like a fairy tale. The other maid scoffs and says, at least the palace feeds you. And if you're clever, she adds, you'll never need to see the Emperor at all. That comment lingers. You begin to realise that selection doesn't mean you're lucky. It means you're useful. Not as a person, but as a potential vessel. One who might bear an air, soothe an Emperor's temper, or even just decorate the background of a ceremonial event. If you're chosen as a concubine, you'll be assigned a rank starting at the bottom, of course, and slowly crawl your way up if fortune allows, or you'll remain where you are, invisible and unimportant, until you're too old to be of interest. Then you're quietly moved to the Palace of Longevity, or some similarly ironic name, where older women live out their remaining days surrounded by embroidery hoops and memories. Here's your historical fact for the night. During the reign of Emperor Qianlong in the 18th century, over 3,000 women were kept within the harem at one time, and yet the emperor had strict protocols about intimacy, only seeing a small number of concubines per month. The rest were simply there, dressed, polished, waiting. Now here's your fringe fact. Some records mention that certain concubines attempted to sabotage each other, Not with poison necessarily, but by subtle means. Switching out creams, planting rumours, even altering perfumes to cause allergic reactions. One favourite method? Hiding chilies in another woman's food to trigger facial redness, rendering her unfit for selection that week. And here's the scholarly debate. Historians still argue about whether all concubines were unwilling participants. Some were raised from childhood with the dream of entering the palace, believing it to be the highest honour a woman could achieve. So were they brainwashed? Or just playing the only game available to them? That's the kind of question you lie awake thinking about here. By the end of the day, you're moved to a shared residence with 5 other girls. You're all still technically ladies in waiting, but your destinies are now tied to how much attention you can attract and how well you can avoid disaster. One girl, clearly from a powerful family, holds herself like she already owns the place. Another cries quietly into her sleeve when she thinks no one's watching. You lie down that night on a polished wooden bed with a stone pillow. Your neck aches already. Above you, painted beams show faded phoenixes and flowering peonies. Beauty is everywhere, but it's stiff, ornamental, just like you're supposed to be. Somewhere nearby a bell chimes. That means another concubine is being summoned to the Emperor's chambers. You don't know her name, you'll probably never see her again. You're woken before dawn again. No surprise there. Sleep is more of a formality here, something you lie through rather than fall into. The room you share still smells faintly of sandalwood and last night's candle smoke. You sit up slowly, careful not to wrinkle your robe. The other girls are already moving, brushing hair, tightening sashes, pretending not to size each other up in the reflection of polished bronze mirrors. Today's the day you receive your official rank. It's not glamorous, there's no ceremony, just another scroll, another eunuch, another line. You line up again in a small hall where the walls are so perfectly symmetrical it starts to mess with your sense of space, and here it comes, the great reduction. Whatever your name was before, it no longer matters. You're now Xiunu, a woman of the 9th rank. The lowest level of concubine, the bottom rung, but hey, at least you're on the ladder. The woman in front of you is called to step forward. The eunuch reads out her new title, Talented Lady of the 8th Rank. She doesn't flinch, but her shoulder twitches just slightly. That's a win, a foot up. Maybe her uncle had influence, or maybe she just has a face that matches this emperor's very specific tastes. The system is maddeningly opaque. You could have better poetry, better posture, and still be passed over because the colour of your eyeshadow reminded someone of a disgraced aunt. There are 8 official ranks for consorts, and each rank is subdivided further. The higher ranks get their own palaces, staff, and often pawn personal connections to the emperor himself. The lower ones, like you, might not see him for years, if ever. You're mostly ornamental, you are part of the background scenery of Imperial life. You learn quickly that survival here isn't about love or beauty, it's about understanding the architecture of power. Where to stand, who to bow to, when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. Back in your shared residence, the girl with the rich family, now titled Noble Lady Yi, is already using her new status like a blunt instrument. She orders the palace maids around like they were her childhood servants, and lectures you all about how she's read the Analects in their entirety. Twice. Someone murmurs something under her breath. Noble Lady Yi pretends not to hear it, but you can already feel the outlines of future battles being drawn. What you notice most about the Forbidden City isn't the grandeur, it's the layers. Layers of lacquer, etiquette, clothing, and lies. Nothing is said outright. Everything has a subtext. A sideways glance can be an insult. A misstep on the stairs might mean someone pushed. Even compliments are suspect. You look radiant today can mean you're attracting too much attention. Be careful. Here's your historical anchor. Each concubine's rank dictated not only where she lived, but how many servants she had, what dishes she could eat, and even how many candles were lit in her room. There were literal handbooks outlining every aspect of harem protocol, down to how many steps you were allowed to take behind the Empress in a procession. Spoiler, it was always a multiple of 3. Now for something stranger, some concubines, desperate for a bump in status, were said to memorize the Emperor's daily habits so precisely that they would accidentally bump into him in the garden or along the corridor at just the right moment. Not exactly romantic. More like strategic haunting. One woman reportedly rehearsed the timing of her walk for 2 weeks straight, just to pass him by while he was in a good mood. He summoned her that same night. 2 months later, she was promoted. Coincidence? Maybe. But scholars can't agree on how much these women actually influenced palace politics. Some say they were mere pawns, trapped in a silk prison, powerless to act. Others argue the smarter ones became players in their own right, aligning with powerful eunuchs or secret court factions to build influence behind the scenes. The truth is probably both, tangled together. For every concubine who faded into obscurity, there was another who whispered just the right thing into the Emperor's ear. That night, your first official night as a ranked concubine, you're invited to a small gathering hosted by a 5th-rank noble lady in the Western Gardens. Invited might be the wrong word. It's more like summoned. These gatherings are unofficial, technically just tea and poetry, but in reality they're reconnaissance missions. You wear your nicest robe, the one with the silver cranes. Not too flashy, not too plain. You're learning the dance. The garden is full of laughter, but none of it reaches anyone's eyes. One woman plays the guqin, fingers fluttering over strings with lethal grace. Another tells a story about a dream she had, where a white fox led her through a frozen forest. Everyone listens politely. No one believes a word of it. You're offered tea, but you don't drink it, not unless you see the host sip first. At one point, the noble lady hosting the gathering turns to you and smiles. "You must be new," she says. Her voice is light, but her eyes are razor sharp. "How lovely it is to still have innocence among us." There it is, your first test. You smile gently and reply, "Innocence is just another word for untested." There's a beat of silence, then laughter, soft but approving. You passed. That night, as you return to your quarters, you realize something terrifying. You're starting to get good at this. You're learning the rules, adjusting your tone, fitting the mold. It's a survival mechanism, sure, but part of you wonders, how much of yourself will you have to give up to keep surviving? Outside your window, the lanterns are already being snuffed out by servants. The night air is thick with garden scent and something more metallic, maybe rain on copper, or maybe the iron scent of ambition. You lie in bed, fully aware of your rank, your room, your chances, and you think this is only the beginning. The next morning brings your first real taste of luxury, and the bitter aftertaste that comes with it. You're summoned to the Hall of Fragrant Harmony for a robe fitting. Not because you've earned anything, not yet, but because now that you're officially ranked, your clothing has to reflect your station. There are regulations. Every colour, every stitch, every embroidered crane or lotus must fall in line with your place in the hierarchy. You're not just getting dressed, you're being codified. Inside the hall, bolts of silk are unrolled like treasure maps, greens and golds and pale lilacs, but the best shades are off limits. Scarlet, reserved for the Empress. Imperial yellow, forget it. Even the sleeve length on your robe can't exceed a certain measure. An older tailor circles you, measuring with a long strip of faded string and humming tunelessly to himself. He mutters something about narrow shoulders. You don't ask whether that's good or bad. Then a surprise. You're given a room of your own. It's still part of a shared compound, but this one has an actual door, a carved wooden screen, and space to breathe. You even get a single servant assigned to you, a girl named Mingli, barely 13, who bows so low she nearly knocks her forehead on the floor. She's from the same province you are. That feels dangerous. Too familiar. But comforting too. Later that day, while you're sipping tepid tea in your tiny courtyard, she tells you that her sister was also in the palace once. Not as a concubine, but a laundry maid. She went deaf from the steam, Mingli says, as if it were a weather report. And then one day she just stopped coming back. No one investigates disappearances in the Forbidden City. That's the unspoken truth. People vanish all the time, maids, eunuchs, even concubines. Officially they've been transferred or discharged. But everyone knows that's not how things work here. The palace eats people, and it doesn't leave bones. Here's your historical fact for tonight. During the Qing dynasty, the Forbidden City housed not just the emperor and his wives, but an entire micro-city of over 70,000 residents at its peak, including eunuchs, maids, guards, and palace officials. It was its own ecosystem, sealed off from the rest of China, with strict rules for movement and speech. Once you entered, you almost never left. Now here's your fringe fact. There were rumours that the Forbidden City had hidden dungeons, secret underground cells where disobedient concubines or troublesome staff were imprisoned indefinitely. No one's ever found these chambers, at least not publicly, but during renovations in the early 20th century, workers reportedly discovered bricked-up rooms behind palace walls. One of them still had a teacup sitting on the floor. Of course, historians debate whether those rooms were really prisons or just forgotten storage. The Empire loved symmetry and secrecy, and it's entirely possible that even now, modern archaeologists haven't mapped the entire labyrinth beneath your feet. What's agreed upon is this. Losing favour in the Forbidden City didn't just mean social exile, it could mean total erasure. Your first week as a ranked concubine passes in a blur of routine. Morning greetings, etiquette practice, calligraphy lessons. You learn how to curtsy just enough to appear respectful without grovelling. You master the art of pretending to listen. You're trained in the delicate skill of incense selection, because the wrong scent can offend the Emperor, ruin your chances, or worse, remind him of someone he'd rather forget. One day you're summoned, along with a few others of your rank, to watch an Imperial ceremony from afar. The Emperor is making an offering at the Temple of Supreme Peace, and although you're not important enough to participate, you're allowed to observe. It's the first time you actually see him. He's not what you expected, taller maybe, or maybe it's the platform he's standing on. He doesn't look at any of you. His eyes are fixed on the ceremonial vessel, his movements choreographed to perfection. You realise this isn't about faith or belief, it's about control. Every step he takes has been prescribed by centuries of tradition. And the women watching him? Also part of the performance. Back in your quarters that evening you find a gift waiting. A single peach blossom branch in a jade vase. No note, no seal. The servant who brought it won't say who sent it. Could be from a eunuch impressed by your poise at the ceremony, or from a rival testing your reaction, or just maybe from the Emperor himself. You don't touch the vase. Instead, you ask Mingli to place it outside on the edge of the garden wall, under the moon. Just in case it was poisoned or blessed. You never know which is worse in a place like this. That night you dream of corridors that never end. Rooms folding into each other like paper. Doors leading to nowhere. You walk through them barefoot, trailing silk, and someone is following you. But every time you turn, there's no one there. You wake up cold, breathless, gripping your stone pillow like a lifeline. You've been here less than a month, and already the Forbidden City feels like it's inside you, coiling around your thoughts, reshaping your instincts. You used to sleep deeply, dream of oceans. Now even your dreams have walls. In the days that follow, you start hearing whispers about the Empress, how she hasn't summoned new concubines in weeks, how she's been watching from behind screens, choosing whom to support and whom to silence. No one dares mention her name directly. You just say, Her Highness, and everyone knows. Word is, she once ordered a concubine beaten for smiling at the wrong moment, or maybe for not smiling enough. You're scheduled to meet her soon, and somehow that feels scarier than seeing the Emperor. The day you meet the Empress, the sky turns the colour of old parchment, dim, dusty and still. The air hangs so heavily that even the birds seem quieter, perched stiffly on the rooftops like carved ornaments. You wake earlier than usual, heart already pounding, and find Mingli kneeling by your side holding out your best robe. Pale blue silk with embroidered plum blossoms, understated but refined. It was chosen not just for beauty but strategy. Too much red reads as ambitious. Too much white hints at mourning. Blue is safe, calm, forgetful. That might be your best bet. Your hands tremble slightly as you wash. Mingli doesn't comment, but she does hand you a vial of rose oil, dabbing it behind your ears with a reverence usually reserved for incense offerings. She's scared too, though she tries not to show it. You notice her, tying your sash tighter than usual, her fingers fumbling the knot. Neither of you speaks. The Empress resides in the Palace of Earthly Tranquility, an ironic name if there ever was one. You're escorted there by two eunuchs, their expressions neutral to the point of eerie. They don't look at you, just walk slowly, deliberately, here giving you time to absorb the fact that you're walking into the lair of the most powerful woman in the Empire. And she's not known for mercy. As you approach the entrance, a line of red lanterns flickers in the breeze, casting trembling shadows across the marble steps. The smell of camphor and powdered sandalwood is overwhelming. You pass through 3 sets of carved doors, each more ornate than the last, until finally you're led into the receiving hall. She's already seated. The Empress doesn't rise. She doesn't need to. Her presence alone sends a cold wave across the room. She sits beneath a painted screen of phoenixes and peonies, her robe a deep imperial gold laced with black thread. Her face is unreadable, powdered smooth, and nearly expressionless, like a porcelain mask. But her eyes could slice through lacquered wood. You bow low. You don't lift your head until a eunuch clicks a jade token on the floor. Permission. You rise, but keep your gaze respectfully lowered. You're careful. This is not the time to speak unless spoken to. And even then, your tone must walk the razor's edge between humility and grace. Too meek and you're weak, too confident and you're presumptuous. You are the one from Suzhou, the Empress says, voice as soft as silk and twice as dangerous. You nod. Yes, Your Highness. They say your mother was a poet. You hesitate. Not because it's untrue, but because you don't know whether that's a compliment or a warning. She had a gift for words, you reply carefully. The Empress looks at you for a long moment. Then just as quickly she turns away. I hope you do not share her gift for rebellion. You lower your head again. No, Your Highness. And just like that, it's over. You're dismissed with a flick of the hand. A servant leads you out through another set of doors, and suddenly you're back in the corridor, blinking like someone pulled you out of a deep underwater current. You made it. You're alive. But that doesn't mean you're safe. Here's your historical fact. The Empress held immense power within the Forbidden City. She wasn't just a figurehead. She oversaw the entire harem, determined promotions and punishments, and was considered the mother of the nation. Even the Emperor rarely overruled her decisions in matters of palace discipline. And now for the darker bit, the fringe fact. It's said that Empress Dowager Cixi, one of the most notorious figures to ever rule behind the curtains of the Forbidden City, once had a rival concubine thrown into a well. No trial, no spectacle, just quietly removed. The well is still there, covered but still there. Of course, some historians argue that tale was exaggerated by later writers who wanted to paint Cixi as cruel and vindictive. There's still debate over whether that well incident was an actual execution, or a metaphor for the way women were discarded and forgotten in the palace machine. Back in your quarters, you collapse onto the bed like a puppet with cut strings. Mingli brings you ginger tea without being asked. She knows the look of someone who's seen the Empress and lived. It ages you, not in years, but in something deeper, like the way silk yellows in sunlight. Over the next few days, you notice a shift. Servants bow just a little lower. The other concubines nod to you with expressions that look polite but feel cautious. Word travels fast in the Forbidden City. You've been seen, and you weren't erased. That makes you something now. Not important, not yet, but viable. At night, you sit by the window, looking out at the hidden courtyards beyond. You can hear the distant rustle of wind through bamboo, and the faint strains of zither music drifting from some unseen palace wing. It's peaceful in the way that only heavily guarded spaces can be. You wonder what the Empress thought of you, whether she saw you as a harmless decoration or a seed that could grow into trouble. You think of the girl who cried in your room on the first day. She's gone now, sent to an outer palace. Word is she tripped on a ceremonial rug during a court walk and ruined the alignment. That's all it takes. One stumble, one wrong smile, one poetic mother. You resolve to be invisible for a while. Not too quiet, not too bold, just enough to be remembered vaguely. You learn to walk like shadow on silk, to smile only with your eyes, to always stand just behind someone more radiant than you. And still, something inside you refuses to disappear completely. Some small, inconvenient pulse of self. You try to ignore it, but the palace never lets you forget who you were, and who you might have to become. Days melt into each other in the palace, indistinct and perfumed, like candle smoke curling into silk curtains. You start marking time by the sound of bells. Early morning for prayer, midday for meals, late evening for curfew. That's how life moves in the Forbidden City. Not with seasons or calendars, but with rhythms, predictable, unchanging, at least until the Emperor notices you. And tonight, that rhythm breaks. It begins subtly. A senior eunuch arrives just after dusk, dressed in crimson robes that sweep the floor like a tide. He doesn't knock, just enters, unrolls a scroll, and announces in a calm, detached voice that your presence is required in the Hall of Mental Cultivation. You know what that means. Everyone does. It means you've been chosen, summoned, selected. Your stomach drops. Mingli says nothing as she pulls out the ceremonial night robe, the one with embroidered lotus flowers and wide flowing sleeves that make it hard to move naturally. You sit on a small stool as she paints your face. Light powder, a touch of vermilion on your lips, a dot of rouge at each cheekbone. Not too much, never too much. You're supposed to look serene, not desperate. Like being summoned is an honour, not a surprise. Your hair is oiled, parted, twisted into a loop and secured with a gold hairpin shaped like a crane, a gift from your entrance ceremony. You'd almost forgotten you had it. You're silent the entire time, because what is there to say? The ritual is exacting. You're bathed again, lightly dusted with sandalwood powder. You change into soft slippers lined with rabbit fur. And then, most awkward of all, you're lifted into a warm embroidered quilt by two eunuchs and physically carried, yes carried, across the courtyard to the Emperor's chambers. It's a protocol meant to preserve the concubine's purity, as if walking on your own might somehow dirty you. Dignity isn't part of this process. The hall is dim, lit only by flickering oil lamps and the eerie blue glow of moonlight filtering through paper windows. You're placed in a side room and left to wait. You sit there alone, hands folded neatly on your lap, staring at the carved table in front of you. Time stretches. Minutes pass. Maybe hours. You don't know. The silence is oppressive. Even your heartbeat seems too loud. Then you hear it. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate. The door opens. You don't look up. When the Emperor enters, you rise and bow deeply. You don't speak until he does. That's the rule. That's always the rule. He's younger than you expected. Or maybe older. His face is somehow both, timeless in the way of those who've been served their whole lives. His expression unreadable, his gaze steady. He says your name, or rather, your title, Lady of the Ninth Rank. He comments that your hairpin is tasteful, that's it. And then the night proceeds, not with passion or romance, but with ritual. A set of actions learned and rehearsed, like a play you're both forced to perform. Nothing spontaneous, nothing personal. Afterward, you're told to lie still until you're dismissed. A eunuch will record your presence in a ledger. If you conceive, it must be traceable to the exact night. You return to your quarters well past midnight, limbs heavy and mind buzzing with questions you're not allowed to ask. Was it good to be chosen? Will it happen again? Was that all there is? Mingli helps you undress in silence. She sees the expression on your face and doesn't press, just folds your robe, lays it neatly aside and hands you a cup of hot tea. You sit by the window again, as has become your habit, and stare out into the dark courtyards. You've done what generations of women have schemed and prayed for, and you feel hollow. Here's the historical fact. The Emperor's nightly visits to concubines were recorded in meticulous detail. A jade tablet with the concubine's name would be placed on a silver tray, and if selected, she would be carried in under a blanket to preserve her warmth and supposed chastity. Every step of this process was regulated by palace eunuchs and recorded for future reference, especially for matters of succession. Now, the fringe fact. There were whispered rumours that eunuchs sometimes swapped jade nameplates to favour certain women, either for bribes or as part of larger political plots. A concubine with the right alliance might find herself chosen, more often than mere chance allowed, and if the Emperor grew suspicious, the punishments were swift and usually quiet. Here's where historians disagree. Was the Emperor really in control of these choices? Or was the machinery of the palace subtly guiding his decisions, steering him towards certain women to secure power balances or appease factions? The Emperor may have ruled the empire, but within the walls of his own home, even he might have been a puppet now and then. In the days that follow, you're treated with sudden delicate attention. Small things change. Your tea is warmer. The couriers bow a fraction deeper. The cook sends sweet lotus pastries to your chamber without being asked. And Lady Yi, once quick to mock or ignore you, starts addressing you with the kind of measured politeness that sounds like an insult in a silk wrapper. Still, there's no second summons, no sign of favour. You become what so many others are here. A possibility, shelved. Something the Emperor might remember on a rainy evening when the usual favourites bore him. You float in limbo between insignificance and danger. One morning, Mingli whispers that a higher-ranked concubine, Lady Chen, has fallen ill. You've never met her, but the servants speak of her in hushed awe. She was once a favourite, summoned weekly, promoted fast. Then suddenly she stopped appearing in the Emperor's company. Word is she became erratic, moody, difficult. She's now locked in her own quarters. No visitors allowed. They say she talks to shadows. That she scratches messages into the lacquered walls with her fingernails. No one dares speak her name aloud anymore, and just like that, her story becomes a cautionary tale. A whisper passed between girls over the tea. She flew too close, burned too fast, and now she's a ghost, still breathing. You finish your tea slowly, watching the steam curl upward and vanish. One night in the Emperor's bed does not mean survival. It just means the game has begun. You're not the only one keeping track. 3 weeks, 2 days and 4 evenings have passed since your night with the Emperor, and already the subtle rituals have begun. Every morning now, Mingli prepares an herbal tonic with dates, wolfberries and powdered pearl. She doesn't say what it's for, but you know, it's the same drink all concubines are given after a visit to the Emperor's bedchamber. Fertility wrapped in sweetness. Or maybe it's hope in a ceramic cup. You sip it obediently, you hold it on your tongue. You pray, though not to any god in particular, just to something, to chance, to biology, to timing. Pregnancy in the Forbidden City is one of the only true currencies. If you carry the Emperor's child, you rise, and fast, and if it's a son, even faster. Entire bloodlines have been elevated to nobility on the backs of those tiny fingers and breathless, squalling cries, but that power comes double-edged, because the moment you're seen as valuable, you're also seen as dangerous. You've seen it happen in whispers around you. One concubine, Lady Anne, has been quietly sequestered after word spread that she was expecting. Her meals now arrive with a taster's delay. Her linens are checked daily for signs of blood. Her footsteps are counted. She's assigned guards, not to protect her from the outside but from other women. Ones who might slip a pinch of mercury into her soup or scatter mugwort near her bed to disturb her womb. Here, a child means not only power, it means target. Now every twitch of your abdomen feels loaded with meaning. A flutter, a cramp. You sit too long in the garden and wonder if the breeze is too sharp, if it might chill something vital. How are you? You try not to be obsessed, but obsession has a way of threading into your days here. It's what the palace feeds on, ritual and anticipation, paranoia seasoned with petals. One morning, Mingli hands you a folded cloth. "It's for tonight," she whispers, and you unfold it to see a small square of pale silk, delicately stitched with a lotus bloom. You recognize it. It's the marker, the undersheet for when you're summoned again. It's meant to confirm you were chosen, that the night happened, that if a child is conceived, there's a record of its origin. No detail is left undocumented. But you haven't been summoned again. You haven't even seen the Emperor's shadow since that first night. The cloth stays folded in a lacquered box by your bed, quietly judging you. Here's your historical fact. Pregnancy in the Forbidden City was considered a divine blessing, not only for the woman, but for her entire family. Concubines who became pregnant were immediately elevated in status, moved to separate and more secure quarters, and surrounded by watchful siesta staff. However, until the birth, and especially if the child was a boy, the mother's life was one of isolation and unease. Now the fringe fact. There are stories, never officially written, but whispered through generations, that some concubines faked pregnancies. They used pads of cotton, diets to mimic symptoms, even forced vomiting to replicate morning sickness. Some paid off palace midwives to vouch for their condition. It rarely ended well. Exposure meant demotion, exile, or worse. But the desperation, understandable. And here's the debate among scholars. Was pregnancy truly the fast track to power it appeared to be? Or did it just paint a bigger target on a woman's back? In theory, a son meant honour. In practice, it also meant isolation, suspicion, and a permanent mark on the political map. Some argue it was safer to remain beautiful and unthreatening. Invisible but alive. You can't stop watching Lady Anne. You've never spoken to her, but now you observe her at a distance like a reflection of what might be. She moves slowly, carefully, always accompanied. Her expression is blank, but her eyes flicker towards the shadows. One morning you see her pause to rest in the shade of a cherry tree. 2 other concubines stroll by and don't greet her. That's not an accident. That night you hear her scream. It cuts through the corridor like a blade, one long, keening wail. By the time you run to your door, the hall is already full of light. Lanterns held by eunuchs, maids with towels, someone shouting for a physician. She miscarried. You don't see her again. Her name isn't spoken in the gardens after that. When asked, the servants say she was moved to a recovery wing, but you know better. So does everyone else. In the palace, tragedy is often repackaged as relocation, and any woman who bleeds is considered defective. That night, you dream of your mother. She's standing in the garden of your childhood home, smiling softly, one hand resting on a tree in bloom. You try to walk toward her, but your feet sink into the stone. She doesn't speak, just watches. When you wake, you're crying and don't know why. Mingli pretends not to notice. She sets your breakfast tray down gently, as if you might shatter from the weight of congee and tea. "Are you all right?" she asks. You nod. It's a lie. You begin to retreat into your routines. You stop walking in the garden. You avoid the communal dining spaces. When the other women gather for embroidery and idle gossip, you stay back, feigning illness or a twisted ankle. You're not the only one. There are always a few of you, orbiting in silence, pulled tighter into yourselves like tea leaves at the bottom of a cup. You bleed. A little, just enough to know it's over. Whatever might have been, if anything had started at all, is gone. The possibility closes like a fan. You fold the silk cloth and return it to the box, still unused, a relic of what almost was. You spend the next week pretending everything is normal, which is both a palace survival skill and a kind of performance art. You smile when appropriate, you nod through etiquette lessons, you drink your ginseng tea. But underneath the daily choreography, something has shifted. You can feel it in the way the palace seems to press in tighter, like the walls themselves are watching more closely now. After the miscarriage, no, after Lady Anne's disappearance, there's a new kind of tension among the women. They speak softly, sit closer, and weigh each other's words like poisoned fruit. Everyone's more careful, even the laughter sounds thinner. There's less colour in the gardens, less perfume in the air, like everyone's decided quietly that beauty is dangerous right now. And then comes the cosmetics box. It's delivered to your quarters early in the morning, lacquered black with mother-of-pearl inlay. Inside is a full set of powdered rice flour, rouge, perfumed oils, and a lips stain the colour of dried blood. At first you think it's a gift, until you notice the insignia on the corner, a phoenix with curling feathers, the Empress. Not a personal gift then, a summons. You're expected to appear at a tea gathering in her private quarters. Attendance is not optional. You spend the rest of the day preparing. The perfume you choose is osmanthus, mild, unprovocative. Traditionally associated with autumn and restraint. Your robe is a simple grey-green with silver edging. Mingli tucks a single pearl into your hair. You avoid anything flashy. This isn't about being noticed. It's about being tolerated. The Empress's private quarters are nothing like the throne-like receiving room where you first met her. This place is quieter, full of light and slow movement. You're one of 10 concubines invited. All low to mid-rank, all young, all with that haunted look of women who've recently been noticed and are still not sure if that's good or bad. She enters silently, dressed in layered silk so pale it almost vanishes into the room. Her crown is modest by Imperial standards, but still heavy with meaning. Phoenixes, pearls, small hanging bells that jingle faintly when she tilts her head. You all rise and bow. The Empress waves her hand. "Sit," she says simply. Tea is served, chrysanthemum laced with honey. You sip carefully, not because you fear it's poisoned, though you can never rule that out, but because you're trying not to spill. Every motion here is recorded, even if no one writes it down. She begins by commenting on the weather, then the peonies in her courtyard. Then casually she brings up the recent change in health of Lady Anne. She says this without emotion, like announcing that a vase cracked or a piece of fruit spoiled. The room tightens around her words like a drawstring. Then her eyes land on you. "You're from Suzhou, aren't you?" "Yes, Your Highness." "Known for gardens and silk." You nod. "And canals." "A place where things flow easily then," she says. Her mouth curls, but it doesn't quite become a smile. "I hope you find our palace equally fluid." You feel everyone watching you now, not with envy but calculation. The Empress has spoken directly to you twice now. That makes you visible, and visibility in the Forbidden City is its own kind of threat. Later, as you leave the gathering, one of the other concubines walks beside you. She's 5th rank, Lady Wen. Beautiful in a precise, sharp-edged way, like a mirror polished too many times. "She likes you," Lady Wen says softly. "I doubt that," you reply. She laughs, but there's no humour in it. Then she's watching you, and that's worse. Here's your historical fact. The Empress held daily or weekly tea gatherings with selected concubines, both as a social display and a political tool. These gatherings weren't about camaraderie, they were subtle auditions. Who remained composed, who slipped up, who laughed too loudly or sat a breath too close to the Empress. It was court theatre disguised as leisure. Now for the fringe fact. Some concubines reportedly use cosmetics not to enhance their appearance, but to poison themselves, just enough to simulate weakness or illness, earning them temporary exile from the harem and protection from internal threats. Lead-based face powders, arsenic-laced lip stains, tools of beauty and survival. The line blurred more often than you'd think, and the ongoing scholarly debate, was the Empress truly the villain of the harem, as some later literature paints her? Or was she simply another player, maintaining balance in a dangerously crowded hierarchy? Some argue her cruelty was exaggerated, her motives misunderstood. Others say her power was built on the broken lives of quieter women. That night, back in your quarters, you can't sleep. You lie in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling's beams. Mingly lights a lavender stick to calm your nerves. It doesn't work. You think about the Empress's gaze, about Lady Wen's warning, about the way the other women reacted when your name was spoken. And then you start thinking about the powder. You sit up, pull the cosmetic box into your lap, open it slowly. Every piece rests neatly in its place. The rouge, the powdered pearl, the little bottle of lip stain. It looks harmless. You touch your finger to it. Just once. The colour is beautiful. You wonder who else has worn it. You close the box and place it on the windowsill. Then you stay awake till morning, just watching the light change. The first time you hear the eunuchs referred to as spiders, you think it's a joke, until you understand the weight of the word. Spiders don't command armies. They don't hold titles, but they spin webs, invisible ones, and wait. That's exactly what the eunuchs do. They're everywhere and nowhere. They move between spaces no one else can reach, hear conversations no one else is meant to hear, and carry messages that can change lives, or end them. You start to notice the patterns, how one eunuch, the thin one with a mole near his lip, always lingers outside the kitchens just before a new concubine is promoted, how another appears in the garden before any announcement of a demotion or exile, how they watch, not obviously, not like guards, but like curators in a museum of delicate, dangerous artifacts. Your first direct encounter comes when a message appears in your quarters, not spoken, not delivered, just placed, a folded square of silk, tied with gold thread, resting neatly on your table beside your calligraphy scrolls. No one saw who brought it. No one knows where it came from, but you open it slowly, hands cold. Inside a single line of verse, the flower bends toward the sun, even in winter. It's not signed, it's not addressed, but you understand. Someone is reminding you that the Emperor once looked in your direction. Someone is saying, don't forget that warmth. You burn the message that night, just in case. Later that week you're summoned, not by the Emperor, but by one of the high-ranking eunuchs, Chief Eunuch Zhao, who oversees the inner court. His face is smooth as wax, unreadable, like a man sculpted rather than born. He invites you to tea. That alone is terrifying. You go, of course, you sit in a finely furnished chamber, sip chrysanthemum tea too hot to enjoy, and wait. He doesn't make small talk. You've drawn attention, he says plainly. That's not always good. You nod. I've done nothing to seek it. No one does, he replies, tapping his long fingernail against the porcelain rim of his cup. But it finds us all the same. Then a pause. There are sympathizers within the palace. People who remember when the Emperor smiled more, slept better. Before certain women, he lets that hang, clouded his judgment. There are those who believe a new influence could restore balance. You understand what he's not saying, that there's a faction, a quiet one, and they think you might be useful. But he doesn't ask anything of you, no orders, no pledges. He just drinks his tea, looks at you over the steam, and says, sometimes survival means choosing the right ear to whisper into. When you return to your quarters, you feel the thread pulling tighter. Here's your historical fact. Eunuchs were among the most powerful and trusted figures in the Imperial palace. Castrated as boys and trained from a young age, they were given full access to the inner court and served as intermediaries between the Emperor and the harem. Some rose to incredible heights of influence, managing palace funds, controlling access to the Emperor, and even shaping political decisions. Now for the fringe fact. Despite their official roles as servants, many eunuchs developed complex personal relationships with concubines, some based on loyalty, others on manipulation. Rumours even swirled that certain eunuchs, despite their castration, found ways to maintain intimate connections. It's difficult to prove, but gossip alone was enough to destroy the reputations. As for scholarly debate, historians continue to argue whether eunuchs were agents of stability or chaos. Some believe they helped regulate the palace, keeping dangerous ambitions in check. Others argue they formed shadow governments within the Forbidden City, orchestrating alliances and plotting downfalls with more finesse than any official court minister. Were they guardians or spiders, or both? You start noticing how the eunuchs test you. Small things. One offers you a different path through the garden. Another, accidentally, lets slip a rumour about Lady Yi, requesting an audience with the Empress. You don't bite, you don't ask, but you remember. You store it all like a squirrel hoarding seeds for winter. Mingli begins warning you when someone's watching too closely. She's perceptive in a way you hadn't realised before. "Don't eat the sweet bean cakes today," she says quietly, one morning. Lady Wen had them sent, but hers went untouched. You feign a stomachache. Later, you find the bean cakes discarded in the servants' corridor untouched and strangely bitter-smelling. You tell Mingli she's clever, she just shrugs. "I've seen too many favourites fall." One evening, as the lanterns are being lit, you catch a strange sound drifting from the North Hall. Not music, not footsteps. Whispered chanting. You follow it as far as your alacnode and glimpse a small side room lit with dozens of tiny candles. Inside, women kneel on the floor, eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. They're not praying to the Emperor. They're praying for protection. From him, maybe. Or from the system that feeds on their youth and then forgets their names. Mingli later tells you it's called the Silent Shrine, a secret ritual some concubines practice when they fear they're being targeted. They ask the kitchen god to turn his face, she explains, to look the other way. You ask if it works. Mingli doesn't answer. The next day, one of the older concubines is found unconscious in the garden. Heat stroke, the physicians say, but no one believes it. Her tea had been too sweet, her face too red. You saw her at the Silent Shrine just the night before. That night you wake with a start, heart pounding, skin clammy. You thought you heard a voice, a whisper behind the screen, but when you pull it aside, no one is there. Just the moonlight casting long shadows on the wall. Still, you keep a knife hidden under your pillow after that. Not because you plan to use it, but because you need to believe you still have choices. It's strange what you learn to miss when you're not allowed to leave. The smell of rain on stone streets. The sound of market bells clanging in the wind. The way your mother used to hum under her breath while shelling beans. In the Forbidden City, memory becomes both a comfort and a curse. Too sweet to let go of, too sharp to indulge. You begin to understand why the older concubines move like ghosts through the palace. It's not just age, it's wear. Tonight you walk through one of the lesser courtyards, arms folded in your sleeves, your shadow long in the lantern light. It's quiet, but not empty. There's always someone watching. Always the rustle of silk behind a screen or the whisper of footsteps just out of sight. The palace feels less like a home and more like a stage where everyone performs their grief with perfect posture. You stop beneath a covered archway and glance into one of the pavilions known as the West Chamber. It's rarely used anymore, dusty, neglected. The doors are sealed with red twine. No one speaks of it openly, but you've heard things. Servants say the chamber is haunted, that you can hear the sound of combs being drawn through long hair at night, that the door creaks open during storms, even when bolted shut. They say one concubine went mad there after her son died, that she lit incense every night and spoke to his spirit until her voice cracked like glass. You laugh a little under your breath. It sounds ridiculous in the daylight. But now, without the night wind curling around you and the stars hidden behind low clouds, you understand that how a place could hold that kind of grief, how walls could soak it in like oil. Back in your quarters, Mingli confesses she once saw a pale shape floating past the West Chamber while delivering late-night herbs. She was weeping, she says, voice low, but her feet didn't touch the ground. You want to believe it's just superstition, the result of too many girls locked in too few rooms for too long, but the truth is, grief in the Forbidden City doesn't die, it lingers. It settles in the corners and walks the halls long after the names have been scratched from the records. Here's your historical fact. Many of the palace's side wings, like the West Chamber, were used as living quarters, prayer halls, or confinement spaces for concubines who had fallen from favour or broken rules. Some were sealed permanently after scandal or unexplained deaths, and others simply faded into disuse as new emperors brought in fresh women and new priorities. Now for the fringe fact. Legend has it that certain halls in the Forbidden City were deliberately sealed to trap spirits. Taoist exorcists were sometimes called to perform rituals over specific doorways, painting talismans and burying protective charms in the foundation. Some of these symbols, when uncovered during modern renovations, showed signs of being altered or erased, suggesting that even the builders feared what might be left behind. As for the scholarly debate, some argue that the haunted palace stories were propaganda, sensational tales crafted to undermine powerful women or discredit rival courts. Others believe these legends are rooted in real psychological trauma, the collective hallucinations of women who were confined, silenced and forgotten for decades at a time. Whether spirits or stress, something stayed behind. You find yourself drawn to the stories. You begin walking the quieter corridors more often, lingering near shuttered pavilions and crumbling courtyards. You tell yourself it's curiosity, but deep down it feels like a search for echoes, some sign that the palace remembers more than just names and ranks. One night, you dream you're standing in the west chamber. The doors are open. Inside, everything glows with a soft blue light. You see a figure kneeling at a table, long hair trailing over her back. She's singing, no, humming, something low and sorrowful. You take a step forward. She turns. Her face is yours. You wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, the scent of sandalwood still clinging to your skin though no incense was lit. In the following days, your behaviour changes. You speak less. You smile only when required. Even Mingley seems unsure of how to reach you. She tries, brings you pastries filled with sweet osmanthus, fresh tea with rosebuds, even a paper fan painted with ducks and lotus blooms. You thank her, you eat, you nod, but you feel the distance growing. Because once you hear the palace whispering, you can't unhear it. You start paying attention to the others who walk with that same haunted stillness. Older women with sunken eyes and flawless posture. One of them, Madame Yun, sits alone every morning under a gnarled persimmon tree, sewing invisible threads into a handkerchief that's already complete. No one joins her, no one interrupts. You watch her for days before she finally speaks to you. "The walls don't forget," she says softly, not turning, "even if you do." You don't ask what she means, you already know. That night, as the wind howls through the courtyard and the lanterns flicker low, you sit by your window and open the cosmetic box again. Not to use it, just to look. Inside, the lip stain has cracked. The perfume has settled. The rice powder has dulled. Everything beautiful fades. You think of the woman in the west chamber. You think of yourself. And you wonder if you'll still know the difference in 10 years. It happens so quietly that at first no one even notices. A name stops appearing in the morning check-ins. A pillow remains unwrinkled on a neatly made bed. A tray of untouched food is taken away without comment. That's how disappearances start in the Forbidden City. Not with alarm, but with absence. A woman goes missing not with a scream, but with silence. This time it's Lady Zin, a concubine from the South Wing. 9th rank, like you? Though slightly older and once the object of subtle envy after she was seen laughing softly with the Emperor during a lantern lighting ceremony. She hadn't been summoned again since, but still she'd been seen. That alone gave her a kind of invisible glow among the rest of you. A thread of possibility. And now she's gone. Mingley is the one who tells you first. Her servant's been Moorish, since been reassigned, she says, folding your robe as if she were talking about the weather. No one will say where she went. That's the first red flag. Servants are never reassigned unless their mistress is gone. Gone in this case doesn't mean relocated, it means erased. You want to believe it was a mistake, a miscommunication. Maybe she fell ill and was moved to a recovery wing. But then the rumours start. That she was caught exchanging secret letters with a visiting nobleman. That she refused the Emperor's second summons. That she laughed too loudly. That her shoes were found near the North Pond at dawn. No one knows the truth. That's the truth. What you do know is that her room has already been emptied. Not just of her belongings, but of her scent, her softness. The lingering presence of someone who once existed in that space. A eunuch moves in to oversee scroll storage. The bed is dismantled, the floor polished. By evening it's as though she was never there. Here's your historical fact. Concubines who broke palace rules, or were accused of doing so, were often removed without trial. Removal could mean exile to a nunnery, silent reassignment to a remote corner of the palace, or in more extreme cases, execution. Records were often vague, using euphemisms like disgraced, relocated, or retired, even if the punishment was far more severe. Now the fringe fact: in certain dynasties, when an emperor died, his favourite concubines were sometimes expected or ordered to follow him in death. Some were buried alive, others forced to ingest poison. While the Qing officially ended this practice, the idea of a woman's life being tied to imperial favour never fully disappeared, and the debate, scholars argue over whether disappearances in the Forbidden City were political, punitive, or personal. Did women vanish because they were threats, or because they had simply outlived their usefulness? Or worse, because someone more powerful needed their space? You spend the next few days watching your surroundings with new eyes. You note who speaks to whom, who avoids your gaze, who eats only half their food. You find yourself checking your pillow for signs, symbols scratched in thread, strange stains, anything out of place. Mingli becomes your second pair of eyes. She starts whispering things in the mornings, which corridors are quiet, which eunuchs to avoid, which maidservants have suddenly started wearing better silk. They are not gift, she says, they're bribes. The more you learn, the more invisible you want to be. But invisibility, your learning, is an art. Be too quiet and you seem suspicious. Too polite and you're called manipulative. Too obedient and you become a blank space no one remembers to protect. So you find a rhythm, smile just enough, praise the Empress's choice in floral arrangements when the opportunity arises. Nod thoughtfully during poetry recitations, don't stand out, don't fade, just hover. One evening you pass by the old music room, a place rarely used now except by a few of the more artistically inclined concubines. You hear the soft pluck of a peeper string and peek in. It's Lady Wen playing alone. Her fingers move like knives across the strings, the melody harsh and beautiful. She sees you but doesn't stop. "You're still here?" she says, not looking up. "As are you." A beat of silence. Then, "Do you think anyone would notice if we weren't?" You don't answer, because you're not sure. That night you dream of the scroll storage room, where Lady Sin's bed used to be. In the dream, the scrolls whisper. Not words, but sounds, rustling like silk over stone. When you reach for one, it unrolls into darkness. You wake to find Mingli watching you from the foot of the bed. "You called out in your sleep," she says gently. "Said her name." You sit up, throat dry. There's a knock at the door. A eunuch stands in the hallway, bowing slightly. "You've been requested," he says, "to assist with flower selection for the courtyard." That's not a real duty, that's a test. You nod, dress, follow. The garden is already glowing with morning light. Several concubines are gathered, pretending to debate which peonies to plant along the eastern wall. The Empress is not present, but you feel her hand in all of it, watching through someone else's eyes. You kneel, touch the soil, comment thoughtfully about shade and scent. Later, Lady Wen murmurs as she passes you, "Well done." You realise with a slow chill that Lady Sin might have failed the same test. Maybe she frowned at the wrong flower, chose red when white was preferred. Or maybe she didn't show up at all. In this place, even your preferences can kill you. That night you light incense, not for a prayer, but for clarity. The smoke rises, curling like fingers. You whisper Lady Sin's name, not because you expect an answer, but because someone should remember. It begins with a rumour about a comb, a simple hair comb lacquered black with a silver inlay of plum blossoms, found beneath the Emperor's pillow. The whisper is that it didn't belong to the concubine who was with him that night. That alone is enough to stir the harem into a quiet frenzy, because in this place objects hold as much power as words, sometimes more. You hear the story second-hand over lunch, from Lady Yan, who speaks without moving her lips, her voice almost invisible under the polite chatter of table conversation. She left it there on purpose, she says, a reminder he hasn't called her in weeks, that she is Lady Jen, a 7th-rank concubine whose beauty has become almost mythical in recent months. She's rarely seen outside her quarters anymore, but when she is, she glows with the kind of calculated perfection that she screams of someone still trying. Not desperately, not openly, but cleverly. Everything she wears is a statement. Every glance is a strategy. And now she's left a comb. It's a move, a quiet one, but it works. Within days, her name appears on the scroll again. She's summoned, twice in the same week. You watch closely. She begins to receive gifts, silk, hairpins, candied kumquats imported from the south. Servants step more quickly when she speaks. Her lanterns are lit earlier, her doors left ajar longer in the evening, signalling to anyone passing by that she is once again desirable. And that's when the real shift begins. Because with favour comes war. The gossip sharpens. Someone says Lady Jen's rouge is made from crushed pearls and the tears of snow foxes. Someone else claims her nightly face oil is laced with snake gall. Because poison, you see, also keeps the skin smooth. Whether it's admiration or fear, you can't tell anymore. It doesn't matter. It's all performance. One evening, a tray of jasmine tea is delivered to your quarters. Mingley frowns as she lifts the lid. "Who sent this?" she asks the maid. The girl shrugs. No note, no markings, just tea. Jasmine's meant to soothe the nerves, settle the body. But here, even a flowers can carry threat. You don't drink it. You start to notice the other women altering their routines. They take longer baths. They visit the embroidery hall more often. They accidentally pass by the Emperor's favoured garden path, where he sometimes walks after his evening meal. It's the equivalent of a battlefield now, but instead of swords, it's perfume, posture, and perfectly timed glances. It's Lady Jen who teaches you that beauty is a weapon, but one with a cost. Here's your historical fact. Imperial concubines were trained not just in court etiquette, but in the delicate arts of attraction. Calligraphy, music, dance, and cosmetic ritual. Every gesture was symbolic. To touch your sleeve a certain way, to smile just so, was not vanity. It was survival. The Emperor's attention was rare and unpredictable. You had to make your mark subtly and memorably. Now, the fringe fact. It's believed some concubines use secret recipes for their cosmetics. Face powders mixed with powdered deer antler, crushed tortoise shell, even trace amounts of mercury to achieve a pale, luminous look. These concoctions were applied daily despite the risks. Beauty wasn't just power. It was pain dressed in silk. And the scholarly debate? Some historians argue that the women of the harem were trapped in a system that dehumanized them. Others suggest they were active agents in their own rise, using every tool available to bend the system, to survive and, in rare cases, to thrive. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the middle. These women were both victims and players, caged birds who learned to sing with knives in their throats. You begin to experiment yourself. Small things, you wear your hair looser one evening, letting a few strands fall over your shoulder. You choose a robe in pale coral, knowing it complements your skin tone but doesn't scream for attention. You write a poem and leave it casually on the garden bench where a certain senior eunuch often takes his midday tea. He later compliments your handwriting into passing. Nothing more, but it's enough to say, "I am here." Still, you don't step into the spotlight. You're not Lady Jen, you don't want to shine that brightly. You've seen what happens when you draw too much heat. Instead, you study the battlefield. Who speaks to whom? Who bows first, who eats the pastries and who doesn't? And you watch as Lady Jen's star begins to wobble. It happens slowly, like the lid of a pot starting to rattle. A servant slips and spills hot tea on her hand. Her favoured maid is reassigned to another wing. She's summoned less frequently. A new robe she ordered is accidentally dyed the wrong colour. Nothing loud, just erosion. A slow, calculated withdrawal of grace. You see her one morning, alone in the covered walkway, her face pale beneath the powder. She's wearing the same robe she wore last week. Her eyes meet yours. There's no spark in them anymore, just awareness. She knows she's falling, and you realise beauty can lift you, but it cannot hold you. That evening, you ask Mingley to bring you charcoal and paper. You start sketching, not portraits, not flowers, but shapes, movement. The lines of a bird in flight, a garden at night. You don't know why, maybe to remember what it feels like to create something that isn't a strategy. The next day your drawing is gone. Mingley swears she didn't move it. And yet that night, a scroll of rice paper arrives on your table. On it, Glyphimos. Written in the Emperor's hand is a single character, fly. You don't tell Mingley right away about the scroll. You sit with it for a while first, turning it over in your hands, running your fingers across the thin, fibrous paper like it might reveal some hidden layer beneath the ink. Just one word, fly. Written in the Emperor's unmistakable calligraphy, slanted, fluid, just slightly impatient at the edges, the sort of script that gives itself away while pretending not to. It's not an invitation, it's not even a command, it's a puzzle. Has he seen your drawing? Is this a compliment or a warning? Is he offering you lift or pointing out the sheer drop. You tuck the scroll into your sleeve and say nothing. The next day, you're summoned again, not for tea, not for garden duty, for him. The palace staff tries to be discreet about it. After all, such summonses are part of the machinery, a routine occurrence. But everyone notices. That's the real game. Every woman within 5 corridors now knows the Emperor has remembered you. The other concubines say nothing, but their glances speak volumes. One lowers her eyes too quickly, another bites her lip behind a fan. Lady Wen brushes your sleeve ever so slightly as you pass, and though she smiles, it's too still to be sincere. That night, you're prepared again. The same ritual. Hot bath, scented oils, white silk robe, the soft slippers, the silent procession. But this time feels different. You don't feel like a participant. You feel like a piece being moved on a game board. You're led not to the hall of mental cultivation, but to the private pavilion of fragrant shadows. That's unusual. That's where the Emperor goes when he doesn't want to be seen, where he entertains without the weight of tradition bearing down on his shoulders. When you enter, he's alone, sitting by a table with an inkstone, brush in hand, a half-finished painting resting before him, mountains, mist, a single bird mid-flight. It's not very good. You've seen better, even from Mingley. But it's clear he's trying. He gestures for you to sit. You do, and for a moment neither of you speaks. Finally he says, "You sketch." You nod. "I saw your bird. It looked like it knew where it was going." You consider your words. "I hoped it would." He looks at you, really looks, not like a man assessing a jewel, but like someone trying to recognise a tune half forgotten. Most people in here don't even pretend to hope. You remain silent. Silence here is often more powerful than speech. He pours tea for you both himself. That in itself is startling. No servants, no eunuchs, just him and you, and the sound of the water being poured as steady and surreal as rainfall indoors. "I don't remember all of them," he says after a long pause. "The ones I've summoned. There are too many. Too few worth remembering." You don't reply. You can't tell if he's being sincere or testing you. He leans back, studies the painting again. They all want something. You take a breath, then say, "And what do you want, Your Majesty?" He almost smiles, not quite, but the corners of his mouth twitch like they've remembered how. "I'll let you know if I find it." You stay for only an hour, nothing happens, no ritual, no night under covers. You share tea, watch him paint, and leave with your robe unwrinkled. And somehow that terrifies you more than anything else. Here's your historical fact. While concubines were commonly chosen for companionship or ceremony, some emperors, like the Qianlong Emperor, developed private relationships with select women who served more as confidants or companions than lovers. These relationships were rare, delicate, and unpredictable. Being chosen in this way often blurred the lines between intimacy and danger. Now for the fringe fact, Imperial records mention a concubine who was summoned dozens of times over several months but never touched. The eunuchs began to refer to her as the Emperor's shadow. She vanished shortly after his death. Some say she walked into the river outside the palace gates. Others claim she was buried alive with him, even though the practice had been outlawed centuries earlier. And the debate? Historians still argue whether these emotionally charged but physically untouched relationships were a form of protection or a subtler form of control. Was the Emperor offering safety by avoiding physical claims, or simply keeping the woman close? While ensuring she remained voiceless in court politics, you return to your quarters unsure whether to feel honoured or terrified. Mingley sees your face and doesn't ask what happened. She just sets a warm cloth on your hands and begins brushing your hair. Her fingers gentle, precise. She's done this 100 times. But tonight it feels different. Like she's smoothing the questions right out of your scalp. You sleep fitfully. Your dreams are cluttered, full of ink, birds, and a comb left behind on a pillow. In the morning a gift arrives. A small box wrapped in blue silk. Inside, a delicate jade bird, wings half unfurled, carved so finely you can see feather ridges along the edge. No note, no need for one. Mingley lifts it from the box and studies it. "He's claimed you," she says softly. "Not officially, but this means something." You ask, "Is that good?" She meets your eyes. "It means you've moved." And that's the thing. Movement in the Forbidden City is rarely upward, and it's sideways. It's quiet, it's slippery. Suddenly, you're no longer forgettable. no longer a face in the crowd. You're an object of interest. And interest comes with consequences. That afternoon, one of the kitchen maids you've never spoken to before bows a little too low. A woman from the Empress's inner circle asks to see your embroidery. A robe you ordered last month arrives early, in finer fabric than expected. Nothing is said aloud, but the web shifts. And now every move you make is on someone's board. You're flying, but you're not sure how high, or how far, or how long before your wings catch fire. By the time you begin to suspect, the signs are already all around you. It starts with a subtle tightening of routine. Your quarters, once quiet and pivot, now bustle with the footsteps you don't recognize. Eunuchs who never used to linger are suddenly everywhere, adjusting incense, straightening floor mats, asking pointless questions. One of them pauses too long over your calligraphy brushes, like he's counting them. Another asks what time you prefer your tea, scribbles something down and then never brings it. You're being watched, and not for curiosity's sake. Then comes the visit from the midwife. She arrives unannounced, smiling with the waxy expression of someone who's done this too many times. She doesn't explain why she's there, just asks you to lie down. Her hands are cold. Her touch is efficient. She presses at your abdomen with the indifference of someone evaluating produce. After a long silence, she nods to Mingli and leaves without a word. Later, you're told a physician will be visiting tomorrow. Another exam. Just routine, they say. But nothing in the Forbidden City is ever just routine. You know what this is? You're being monitored for pregnancy. And the terrifying part? You're not sure whether to hope for it or fear it. You remember what happened to Lady Anne. You remember the screaming, the blood, the way her name disappeared from every mouth within hours. Child in the womb can crown you, turn your name into a legend. But it also makes you vulnerable. You become a walking target, a threat disguised as a gift. And you're already too visible. After your last audience with the Emperor, the attention hasn't stopped. You're summoned regularly now, not just to him, but to official functions. Tea with the Empress, where every word you say feels like it's being preserved in wax. Poetry readings where noble women eye you like they're measuring your value per syllable. You're asked your opinion on flower arrangements, robe trims, palace rumours. None of it matters, and all of it matters. Lady Wen speaks to you more frequently now, but her tone is different. Warmer on the surface, but clipped underneath. Like she's trying to gauge whether to align herself with you or keep her distance. You can feel her calculations, ticking behind her eyes like a clock. You've changed, she says one afternoon, folding a silk fan. The Emperor seems to find your company tranquil. You hear what she's really saying, safe, non-threatening. She's testing the waters, trying to decide whether you're going to rise or explode. Here's your historical fact. In the Forbidden City, concubines who became pregnant were automatically elevated one or more ranks, regardless of the previous status. The pregnancy was considered a direct sign of imperial favour, and more importantly, potential succession. A woman carrying a son was protected, prized, and endlessly scrutinised. She was also resented. And your fringe fact, midwives assigned to palace women were not just medical professionals, they were also informants. Many were known to report directly to the Empress, or to eunuch factions vying for control. It's said that more than one early miscarriage wasn't natural at all, but prompted by corrective herbs slipped into teas and soups. They called it resetting the womb. As for the scholarly debate, some historians argue that pregnancies were manipulated, even staged, as tools for factional leverage. Rumours persist that women were sometimes impregnated outside the court and passed the children off as the emperors to gain rank. These claims are impossible to confirm, but in an environment where a child meant everything, there's little the palace wouldn't do to control the narrative. You begin keeping your own secrets. You wait until Mingli is asleep, then pour half your morning tonic into the potted orchid on your windowsill. You stop eating the glutinous rice cakes sent from the Empress's kitchens. You start writing down every food, every herb, every odd reaction your body has, documenting the subtle shifts in temperature, mood and breath like a scholar tracking eclipses. And you watch the women around you change too. Lady Jen, once so brilliant, now walks slower. Her hair is less elaborate, her voice softer, almost meek. Some say she's unwell, others say she's waiting, silently preparing to make her next move. Her quarters are under surveillance, her servants rotated out. She's no longer flying, she's hovering just above the fall. Then there's Lady May. a younger concubine of no remarkable beauty but endless charm. She's been seen laughing with the Emperor twice this week. Word spreads quickly. Her robe sleeves are new, her hair ornaments heavier. Some say she hums when she walks, like she already knows she's next. You feel the circle tightening. At night, you dream of doorways, long corridors filled with red lacquered doors, each opening into another room, then another, then another. You walk endlessly barefoot, your robes trailing behind you, until finally you come to a room where all the walls are mirrors. You see yourself reflected 1,000 times, and in each image your face is different. Pregnant, powerful, dead. You wake with your hand on your stomach. You feel nothing, and yet. The physician visits the next morning. You sit still as he listens to your pulse, counts your breaths, peers into your eyes with an expression as flat as his paper fan. He writes something on a scroll and folds it shut. Mingley intercepts him before he leaves. And? He smiles politely. Healthy. No changes yet. No changes yet. You're not sure whether to sigh in relief or disappointment. That evening the Emperor sends for you again, but this time the request comes with a robe. It's soft red, not the deep Imperial crimson reserved for high-ranking women, but a gentler shade, almost rose, a quiet signal, intimacy without commitment. You put it on. You go to him. You talk for hours about poetry, about riverbanks in spring, about the shape of birds' wings. He reads from your sketchbook, asks you to describe the places you grew up in. For the first time you tell him something real, about your mother's silk weaving, about the sound of looms clattering in the morning, about how you used to run your hands over unfinished fabric and imagine yourself wearing it. He listens, he watches, he never touches you. When you return to your quarters, Mingley is waiting with ginger tea and a fresh sheet of linen for you to sleep on. You lie down, unsure what to feel. Not chosen, but not dismissed. Somewhere in between. You feel your body as if from the outside, bones wrapped in silk and expectation. You're not pregnant, but you are being prepared. There's a rhythm to intimacy in the Forbidden City, and it's nothing like the stories you were told as a girl. Forget sweeping gestures or moonlit poetry. Here, affection is a bureaucratic process. Structured and recorded, stripped of spontaneity. Everything, the invitation, the preparation, the act itself is governed by protocol. Nothing is left to chance. Not even the way you walk to bed. Tonight, you're summoned again. Not to talk, not for tea. This time it's unmistakable. The eunuch's voice is even flatter than usual when he delivers the message. The Emperor has requested your presence for rest. Rest. The most ironic euphemism in the palace. It doesn't mean sleep. It means you will lie beside the most powerful man in the Empire, draped in silk and silence, and follow a script older than either of you. Mingley bathes you with practiced hands. She speaks only once as she pins your hair in a simple twist. Do not forget the powder tonight, she says. Not the pearl one, the other. You know what she means. The fertility blend, hidden inside a small porcelain dish, painted with lotus flowers. You dust it onto your chest and behind your ears. It smells faintly of jasmine and salt. When the eunuchs arrive, you do not walk. They carry you again inside a blanket, half tradition, half humiliation. You're not a person in this moment. You're a symbol, a possibility. In the chamber, the lights are already dim. The incense is deeper tonight, ambergris and musk, almost dizzying. The Emperor doesn't speak when you enter. He gestures to the bed, as if this were a chore, a transaction, and maybe it is. You lie beside him. He touches your hand, just once, then pulls the silk cover over both of you. The night is quiet. There is no candlelight, romance, no whispered longing. He is clinical but not cruel. You close your eyes and let it happen. You do not moan or resist or offer any sound at all. You play the role perfectly. When it's over, he rolls away. There is a moment when you almost speak, not to ask anything, not to plead, just to say something human. But you stop yourself, because this isn't a conversation, this is a record. A eunuch enters silently with a small bronze lantern. He checks your presence, bows, leaves. The scroll has been marked. Your place in the night's history is secure. You return to your quarters carried the same way you came, wrapped in cloth, as if you're too fragile to touch the earth. Your skin smells of musk. Your body feels like it doesn't belong to you. Mingley waits at the door, her expression unreadable. She helps you undress. The bedsheet she lays out is new, so is the tea. "You may conceive tonight," she says softly. You nod, but you feel hollow. Here's your historical fact. In the Qing dynasty, imperial concubines chosen for intimacy followed a rigid set of steps. They were bathed, powdered, and wrapped in a ceremonial cloth before being carried to the emperor's chamber. Afterward, their presence was logged by eunuchs, who maintained records of every woman's visit. These logs ensured that paternity claims could be verified in case of pregnancy. Now for your fringe fact. Some concubines attempted to manipulate these rituals. It said a few bribed eunuchs to swap name tags or smuggled charms into the emperor's bedchamber, tiny talismans for conception, influence, or protection. One notorious case involved a woman who placed a red thread under the pillow, believing it would bind the emperor's heart to hers. He never summoned her again. And the scholarly debate, was intimacy in the palace truly about desire? Or was it entirely strategic? Some historians suggest that the emperor often deferred to political necessity, summoning women not for pleasure, but to appease factions, reward noble families, or even send coded messages to rivals. In this reading, the bedchamber was just another court. You spend the next week caught in a strange limbo, watched more closely than ever, and yet untouched. Every day begins with a warm tonic. Every night ends with you staring at the ceiling, listening for changes in your body. You become hyper-aware of everything. A skipped meal feels like a signal, a stomach flutter, a prophecy. The other women notice, of course. Lady May glances at your waist more often now, her expression unreadable. Lady Wen is distant again. She speaks to you only in the most polite terms, like you've become dangerous. Or perhaps disappointing. You're no longer just a girl with potential, you're a variable in the succession plan. Mingley keeps a tally. She marks the calendar with a soft red brush, tracking your cycle, your moods, the Emperor's summons. It's math now. You're a formula waiting to solve itself. And yet, no change. Your body remains yours, for now, but you know the clock is ticking. One morning, the Empress's envoy arrives. A woman named Madame Sue, stern and hollow-cheeked, dressed in bronze-trimmed robes and lacquered shoes. She brings no message. She just stands in your quarters, inspecting. Mingley bows so deeply you think she might break in half. Madame Sue opens your wardrobe, touches your combs, studies your embroidery. Finally, she picks up a painting you've been working on in secret, an ink sketch of a heron wading in water. "Birds again," she says. "Do you long to fly, lady of the 9th rank?" You keep your expression smooth. "Only when I dream." She looks at you for a long moment, then sets the painting down. "Dreams," she says, "are dangerous in this place." And just like that, she leaves. You burn the painting that night, watch it curl into ash in the incense burner, while Mingley pretends not to see. Later, you stare at your reflection in the bronze mirror, skin pale under the lamplight, lips faintly stained with the night's powder. You touch your stomach, still flat, still silent. If a child forms inside you, you will not belong to yourself again for years. But if no child comes, you know what happens to women who stay empty too long. They never tell you directly that you've fallen out of favour. There's no scroll with your name crossed out, or no official demotion, no mourning gong. You simply begin to notice what's no longer happening. The trays arrive colder, the embroidery silks are lower quality, the summonses stop coming. And then one day, your jasmine plants are removed from the window ledge without explanation. That's how you know. At first, you convince yourself it's temporary. A shift in rotation, a quiet week, a season. But deep down, you've been expecting it. You've watched it happen to other women, brilliant, hopeful, cautious women who played every note just right until one day the music stopped. It always starts the same way, with silence. You keep your head down, fall back into routine. You attend etiquette rehearsals with perfect posture, drink your morning tonic without protest, and embroider your handkerchiefs with diligence so precise it feels like punishment. You speak less. You sleep more. You breathe, quietly, like someone waiting for a verdict that's already been decided. But the change isn't just in the silence, it's in the space around you. Mingley begins waking you later in the mornings. She no longer counts your steps to the courtyard or prepares your robes with the same nervous care. There are no more surprise visitors. The foot traffic in your wing slows. Conversations hush as you pass, not because you're feared, but because you've become unimportant. Then one day your room is reassigned, not to someone else yet, just repurposed. A scribe comes to measure the floor. A junior eunuch stands at your door with a scroll, squinting at the characters like he's trying to remember who you are. And when you ask Mingli what's happening, she only says, "You're being relocated, my lady. A quieter hall." A quieter hall. The phrase is gentle, but the meaning isn't. You're being moved to the edge of the palace, to disappear. Here's your historical fact. When a concubine fell from favour, whether through illness, age, or simply the emperor's disinterest, she was often quietly reassigned to a peripheral residence in the palace, referred to in euphemisms like the calm quarters or the inner peace wing. These places were less luxurious, lightly staffed, and functioned as soft exiles for women no longer deemed necessary. Now the fringe fact, some of these wings had reputations darker than their peaceful names. Servants whispered of strange echoes, long silences, and rooms that seemed colder than the others. It was said that a woman could live there for years without being summoned, eventually forgotten even by the record keepers. One of these places, nicknamed the Shadow Wing, was reportedly sealed shut after a concubine hung herself with her own sash and wasn't discovered for days. And here's the debate. Was this isolation deliberate, a cruelty cloaked in protocol, or was it simply the byproduct of a system too large and impersonal to track every discarded life? Some scholars argue that these forgotten concubines were victims of negligence. Others believe they were quietly removed to protect palace stability. Too many women, after all, created too many risks. You walk to your new quarters with your head high, but your heart sinking. The path winds farther than you've ever walked in the Forbidden City, away from the familiar courtyards and painted halls, past the better quarters, past the training wings, past the sculpture garden where no one really goes anymore. The air feels different here, stiller, thinner, as if the wind has forgotten this place exists. Your new room is smaller, damp. The walls haven't been painted in years. The window opens onto a narrow alley, not a garden. There's no courtyard fountain here, no silk-draped canopy, just a thin straw mat on a wooden frame and a small chest for your robes. Mingli sets your things down without speaking. You sit on the edge of the bed, staring at the dust motes floating in the slant of grey light. You thought you would cry, but you don't. You just feel small. Days pass like smoke. You eat simple meals, rice and boiled cabbage. No sweet bean cakes, no jasmine tea, no more scroll deliveries. The world shrinks to the size of a room, a corridor, and a garden no one enters. Sometimes other women pass by in silence. Women like you, former favourites, former risks, former almosts, you see them at a distance. Faces lined not by age but by stagnation. They don't greet you, they don't meet your eyes. You begin to understand why ghosts never speak. Mingli stays for now. She still braids your hair but with fewer pins. She still boils your tea but never offers news. She watches you like she's waiting for you to break. You don't. You just keep moving one foot in front of the other, even if it's only from one end of your cell to the other. One afternoon you ask her, "Do you think he'll ever call for me again?" She looks at you for a long moment. "I think," she says slowly, "it's better if he doesn't." And maybe she's right, because being forgotten might be the last glimmer of safety you have. That night, you dream of a door opening, a familiar voice calling your name. You run toward it, barefoot, hair unbound, breath catching in your throat. But when you reach the doorway, it slams shut. You wake in darkness, the silence pressing in like stone. There is no knock at your door, no footsteps in the hall, no summons. You're still here, still alone, still intact, and that, for now, is enough. The first time you hear the ghost, you think it's just the wind. It moves through the corridor outside your quarters with a low, almost human moan, the kind of sound that rises in waves, like someone trying to remember how to cry. You lie still in your bed, holding your breath, every muscle tensed under the threadbare silk blanket. It's the dead hour, when the moon has sunk low and the palace forgets how to pretend it's alive. Mingli is asleep on her mat by the door. You could wake her, ask if she heard it too, but you don't, because you're not sure what's worse, confirming that it was real or learning that only you heard it. In the days that follow, it happens again. A whisper in the corners of the corridor, a shadow crossing your window when no one's there, the rustle of silk where there's no fabric to move, always at night, always just at the edge of reason. The other women in the isolation wing say nothing, but their behaviour changes. One begins hanging talismans over her doorway, scraps of red paper inked with shaky brushwork. Another sprinkles salt outside her threshold. Mingley starts burning dried mugwort before bed. You don't ask her why, she doesn't offer. And then one night you hear humming, low and mournful, carrying through the rafters like breath trapped in wood. You sit up in bed, eyes wide. It's a lullaby. A southern folk song you haven't heard since childhood. Your mother used to hum it while weaving. You haven't spoken of it since arriving at the palace. No one here knows it. No one could, unless they're already inside you. You wake Mingley this time. She stirs groggily, then freezes when she sees your face. I heard her, you whisper. Mingley doesn't ask who, she just nods. That's when she tells you about the West Chamber. Not the stories servants share in passing, but the real one. The one they whisper only after too many nights and too little light. Years ago, during the previous Emperor's reign, a young concubine named Lady Ruey lived there. Barely 15, chosen for her voice. A voice that could hush a banquet hall or melt a minister into silence. The Emperor adored her. For 6 months she was summoned every night. And then, without warning, he stopped. No explanation, no visit, nothing. Lady Ruey waited. She wrote letters, she prayed-walled, she begged. And finally one night she hung herself with the red silk sash gifted to her on her promotion. No one found her until the morning after. Her lips were still slightly parted, like she had one note left. They sealed the chamber the next day, and yet the singing never stopped. Here's your historical fact. Throughout the Forbidden City's long and layered history, several wings were permanently sealed due to unrest of spirit, or inappropriate energy, according to archived documents. While the official language was vague, first-hand accounts from eunuchs and palace workers mention areas where no one wanted to serve, where inexplicable noises and misfortunes occurred with alarming frequency. Now your fringe fact. Some eunuchs were trained in basic exorcism rituals. Not full Taoist priests, but spiritual technicians, tasked with clearing haunted spaces through incense, chanting, and the placement of protective objects like bronze mirrors and 5-element charms. One such mirror, found during a modern restoration near the West Chamber, was inscribed with the character for soul etched backward, intentionally to confuse the dead. And the debate, were these ghost stories real supernatural phenomena, or psychological projections from a confined population of women under constant surveillance and fear? Scholars argue both sides cite the overwhelming stress and lack of autonomy as fuel for mass hallucination. Others point to the specificity and consistency of the reports as signs that a belief, real or not, held a terrifying power of its own. After the humming, your days shift again. You begin noticing things out of place. Comb you never touched landing on your pillow. A hairpin balanced perfectly on your windowsill despite the shutters being closed. One morning your mirror is cracked clean down the centre. When you ask Mingley, she crosses herself in silence and refuses to speak for the rest of the day. So you start your own ritual. You braid your hair each night and tie it with a ribbon 3 times. You sweep your floor precisely 9 strokes north to south. You place a single coin under your pillow, a habit you barely remember from childhood, and you hum, softly, your own tune, your own song, to drown out the one that's trying to replace it. It helps a little. Until the new girl arrives. She's barely 13, eyes wide and voice high, unranked, unnamed, freshly plucked from some northern province and dropped into your fading world. Her quarters are across the corridor. Her presence alone is proof of what you feared. Your replacement is here. The cycle continues. She comes to you one afternoon clutching a teacup. "It's too quiet here," she whispers. "I think someone's singing at night." You don't answer. That evening you find her staring at her own reflection, holding her hair like she's forgotten what it's for. You sit beside her. "Braid it," you tell her. 3 times, then knot it. Why? Because you're still alive. She listens. You give her your cracked mirror, the half that still reflects. "Only look in this one, Mew." "Not the one they give you!" She nods. You don't know if she believes you, but she hums herself to sleep that night. It's not the same song. That's what matters. The ghosts in the Forbidden City don't rattle chains or drag shadows across the floor. They whisper, They wait, they sing your name until you forget it's not theirs. So you keep humming, because as long as your voice is your own, you're still here. You wake to thunder, not the crackling kind that splits trees in two, but the low, rolling thunder that settles over everything like an omen. The sky outside your narrow window is heavy with dark clouds, and for once, even the palace feels unsettled. The usual routines are disrupted. Footsteps are faster, orders come louder. No one says it out loud, but you can feel it in the air. Something's happened. Mingli rushes in without knocking, her face pale. "The Emperor is ill," she whispers. It takes you a moment to register the words. She nods slowly. "Since last night. They say he hasn't spoken since morning. The inner court's sealed." Just like that, the world tilts. The Forbidden City thrives on predictability, on the constant churn of rituals and rules. But when the centre begins to decay, everything around it rots in silence. An ill emperor means a dozen different things, none of them good. Succession, power grabs, factional scrambles. Concubines rise and fall in an instant. Some vanish, some resurface. All of it happens in whispers. By evening, the palace feels colder. Eunuchs dart past like hados, couriers stop speaking mid-sentence. You're not called to the evening meal, and no one comes to your door. Even Mingli is restless, checking the locks, adjusting the incense burner, watching the windows like they might open by themselves. "You should burn your letters," she says softly. "I have no letters." "Then burn what you've written." You don't ask how she knows. Of course she knows. She's seen your poems, your sketches, the short lines you've scribbled on the backs of scrap paper to keep your mind sharp in the quiet. Gather them all that night, ink-stained leaves of thoughts and longing, and feed them one by one into the brazier. The room fills with smoke and regret. The next morning the sky still hasn't cleared. And then, finally, the truth arrives. The Emperor is dying. Not officially, of course. That word isn't spoken, but everyone knows. The halls are too still, the music has stopped, the courtyards are unkempt. And then the servants begin bowing to his portrait each morning before meals, a custom reserved for times when the ruler cannot give orders. That's when you realise, this palace isn't mourning yet, it's waiting. Here's your historical fact. When an emperor of the Qing dynasty fell seriously ill, the Forbidden City entered a controlled state of suspense. The Empress and high-ranking court officials would handle all major decisions, while the harem would be placed under temporary isolation. No concubines were allowed to visit him unless summoned. Many never saw the Emperor again before his death. Now your fringe fact. During the final days of a dying emperor, certain concubines would attempt desperate moves, offering themselves for healing rituals, making secret visits to fortune-tellers hidden in the servant ranks, even placing personal items, combs, hair, tokens, beneath the Emperor's mattress in the hopes of binding their spirit to his. Some believed that if he dreamed of you in his final hours, he might name you in his will. And the debate, were these gestures acts of love or power plays? Historians argue over the sincerity of harem women during imperial deaths. Were they grieving the man or the position? Was fear of exile driving them more than loss? In a world where survival hinged on being remembered, maybe mourning was just another kind of performance. In the following days, the whispers grow louder. Lady Jen, who once wore her ambition like perfume, is said to have been dragged from her quarters screaming. No one confirms it. Her room is simply shuttered now, with no light showing from within. Lady May vanishes just as quickly. No goodbye, no procession, only an empty pillow where her head once lay. You begin preparing, not for promotion, not for grief, for erasure. You clean your quarters, you pack nothing, there's nothing to bring. You keep your shoes beside the door because, if you're summoned, it won't be with notice. You sit at your small window and watch the clouds roll by. They haven't lifted in days. Mingli says little now. She braids your hair each morning without decoration, like a sister preparing you for a journey neither of you will take. You ask her, finally, what happens when he dies? She takes a long breath. If there's no child, if he never named you, they'll send you to the outer palace, or to a nunnery, if you're lucky. And if not, she doesn't answer. You already know. Night you light a single candle, just one. The room glows soft and gold, and for a moment it feels like the palace has paused for you. You reach under your pillow and take out the jade bird. It's grown cold in your hands. You hold it up to the light, trace your finger along the curve of its wing. You imagine what might have happened if things had gone differently. if you'd conceived, if he'd summoned you more often, if you'd been promoted, if you'd mattered more. But those are stories for a different version of you, one who flew. You fall asleep with the bird pressed to your chest, half expecting to be awoken in the night by a knock, a summons, a name called. It never comes, and when morning arrives there are drums, not loud, not fast, just one steady beat, slow as a heartbeat beginning to fail. Mingley enters quietly. Her eyes are red. "He's gone," she says. You already knew. The palace doesn't cry. It silences itself. The corridors fill with veiled faces. Food is withheld. Lanterns are extinguished. Incense is burned around the clock. The Emperor's favourites are sealed in their chambers for review. Some may never leave them. You are not summoned, not questioned. You are nothing to them now. You have survived. And that somehow feels both like freedom and like death. The day after the Emperor's death, the Sagai breaks. Rain comes, not gentle, not cleansing, but a grim and constant sheet that soaks the red-tiled rooftops and turns the palace courtyards into shallow, silent mirrors. Everything reflects now. The eaves, the lantern poles, the pale faces of women who don't speak anymore. The Forbidden City wears its mourning like it wears its secrets, deliberately, with layers. You're confined to your quarters like everyone else. Not locked in, not explicitly forbidden to leave, but the message is clear. Stay still. Don't be seen. This isn't your story anymore. A black sash is draped over your doorway by a servant you don't recognise. Mingley bows as he does it. You don't. Not because you're disrespectful, but because you're too tired to pretend today. It takes effort to mourn a man you barely knew, who barely knew you, and who still managed to shape the course of your entire existence. The palace is now in a state called Shu, a period of ritual mourning that will stretch for 100 days, so 100 days of fasting, silence, and suspended titles. No makeup, no music, no laughter, no colour. You strip your robes of embroidery, unpin your hair, wash the last traces of rouge from your lips and face. When you look in the mirror, you look like a shadow of the girl who first arrived, too pale, too thin, and yet strangely steady. You're still here, somehow. You don't cry, you just sit by the window and watch the rain, listening to the way it hisses against stone like a secret no one can keep anymore. Word begins to travel through the walls. The new emperor has been named. His son, by a different concubine, a higher-ranking one. You'd only seen her once from a distance, seated in a golden robe beside the Empress during the spring ceremony. She hadn't smiled. She hadn't needed to. Her son is young, too young. So for now, the Empress will rule behind the screen as regent. That's how it goes. The women of the court may never wear the crown, but they hold the knife behind the curtain. You don't know what will happen to you. Here's your historical fact. After an emperor's death, his harem underwent immediate restructuring. The Empress Dowager, if living, assumed authority. Favourites of the previous emperor were either promoted into advisory or honorary roles, relocated to quiet residences, or in many cases, sent to Buddhist nunneries in the western provinces. The imperial court had no room for the dead man's women in the presence of a new ruler. Now the fringe fact. Some women, particularly those without children or titles, were retired in secret ceremonies that involved oaths of chastity, shaved heads, and relocation to isolated compounds. It said a few even faked madness to avoid being sent away, believing that if they became ghosts of themselves, they could remain in the palace unnoticed. And the scholarly debate. Historians still question the autonomy of these decisions. Were concubines allowed any say in their fate after the emperor's death? Or were they simply recategorized like items in a vault, moved, sealed, or discarded depending on their last known value? There are scattered accounts of women who resisted, appealed, or tried to flee. Most end in silence. A week into mourning, you're called to the Hall of Ancestral Harmony, not alone, but with a cluster of concubines, all from the lower ranks. You recognise only a few, most are pale, quiet, drained. A scribe reads from a scroll. You're all being reviewed. Evaluated for disposition and relocation. No one explains what that means, but the words hang heavy in the room like wet silk. You're asked your name, your rank, whether you have children, whether you were ever promoted, whether you carry anything of the Emperor's blood. You answer, no, 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 no. Your fate is decided in that moment. You're assigned to the outer court, still within the walls of the Forbidden City but far from power, a wing of widowed women, aging maids and concubines who are no longer useful. The name of your new home, the quiet pavilion. You almost laugh. Of course it is. You pack nothing but your comb, a single hairpin, and the jade bird, which you wrap carefully in cloth and tuck between 2 pages of an old poetry book. When you arrive at the quiet pavilion, it's raining again. The building is low, plain, barely maintained. The garden is overgrown. Moss grows between the bricks. The furniture is simple and worn. Your new room smells of mildew and dried lotus stems, but it is safe, and quiet, and yours. There are others here, 6 women in total. You see them at a distance. No one speaks on the first day. Everyone is in their own mourning, not just for the Emperor, but for what they used to be. They wear their past like faded robes. Beautiful once, barely intact now. You find yourself taking long walks in the rain, hood drawn, hands tucked inside your sleeves. The palace looks different from the Edged, less like a monument, more like a cage whose bars have softened with time. You pass shrines covered in dust, empty halls once alive with whispers, a single shoe abandoned beside a garden wall moulded over with moss. This place forgets quickly. But you don't. Not yet. Mingli joins you in the pavilion, though you know she could have asked for reassignment. She stays anyway. You think it's loyalty, or maybe pity, or maybe she simply doesn't want to start over again. One night she brings tea to your Wando and sits beside you. Neither of you speaks for a long time. Finally she says, "Do you miss him?" You look into the rain. "No," you say. "I miss being seen." She nods. You sip your tea in silence. Somewhere a bell tolls for evening prayers. You're not required to attend anymore. You're not required to do anything, really. That's the strange gift of being forgotten. No one is watching. You can begin to remember who you were, or decide who you'll be now. It starts, as most revolutions do, with paper. You find it one morning tucked behind a loose stone in the pavilion wall. A folded square, thick and creased, smelling faintly of ink and candle smoke. No name, no seal, inside a poem. Not an old one, not the kind taught in the palace schoolrooms, all measured grief and acceptable metaphor, but something new, raw, angry. In the house of 1,000 women, the loudest voice is Kion's. Let it break. You reread it 3 times before hiding it under your pillow. You think it's a fluke, some maid scribble, maybe a leftover from years ago. But the next week, another appears. This one slid beneath your door with a dried peony petal pressed into the fold. Another poem, this one a list, thinly veiled as verse, of women who vanished from the registry within a 2-month span. Lady Xin is on it, Lady Anne. A few names you don't recognise. At first you keep the messages, then you begin replying, not with your name. Just small annotations written in tiny brushstrokes along the margins, a single character, a question mark, a date. You slide your replies back into the stone crack where you found the first, never knowing who will read them. But someone always does. One morning the paper you left is returned, now bearing an additional message. You're not alone. Paper lotus. It's absurd, it's dangerous, it's childish. And yet, you haven't felt this alive in months. You begin to pay closer attention in the quiet pavilion. There's more movement here than you first realised. Not the flailing of forgotten women trying to reclaim their youth, but something quieter, sharper. Late-night walks, shared glances, a cough that's actually a signal, a thread left loose in a hem. It doesn't take long before you're invited. Not directly. You're never directly invited to something like this. It begins with Mingli telling you not to wait up. She's going to the laundry hall at night, which makes no sense. When she returns, she smells of incense and wet stone. "I dropped my comb," she says like a line in a play, "but someone found it for me." You look at her. She meets your eyes for the first time in days. "You should come next time," she says, and you do. You follow her through corridors that have always been there, but that you've never dared enter after sunset. You pass under archways covered in ivy, slip through kitchens gone cold, walk scantily behind a curtain of hanging lanterns with no candles inside. You reach a room beneath the south wing, unused, unfurnished, with dust so thick on the floor that your footprints look like words being written as you walk. There are 5 other women inside. Some you recognise, one you don't. They don't greet you with smiles or bows, just nods, acknowledgement, permission. They sit in a circle around at an old brazier with a single sheet of paper inside curling into the fire. The flame is low, quiet. It smells like sandalwood and ink. Lady Wen is there. Of course she is. She doesn't look surprised to see you. She gestures for you to sit beside her. "I didn't think you'd want to be part of this," she says. "I didn't know I needed to be," you reply. The others share news. Nothing grand, just information. Who's being reassigned, which eunuchs are loyal, which servant girls have sisters in the city, who's been seen at the wall near the Garden of Purity, where the outer gates can be glimpsed if the light hits just right. They speak of records, of names erased, of lives rewritten, of women who left behind more than just silence. And you realise this is the rebellion, not swords, not poison, not spectacle, just memory, paper, ink, truth. Here's your historical fact. Throughout the Qing dynasty, there were countless unrecorded movements within the Forbidden City. Not armed uprisings, but subversive acts of preservation and protest. Women kept secret diaries, copied documents, and whispered names long after they were officially gone. Some of these writings were smuggled out through laundry carts and servant channels. A few survived, most didn't. Now the fringe fact. A document discovered in the early 1900s, hidden inside the lining of a ceremonial robe, contained a list of over 50 concubines who disappeared between 1742 and 1750. No explanations, no fates, just names. The handwriting matched no known scribe. No one knows who wrote it. Scholars dubbed it the Paper Lotus List, and the debate was the rebellion real, or just myth layered onto fragments. Some believe the Paper Lotus was a code name for a group of concubines working together to record the truth. Others argue it was just a metaphor, one woman's desperate act romanticised into resistance. Either way, it has become legend. You leave the meeting with a piece of paper in your sleeve. It bears only one line. A lotus blooms in the mud because it has no choice. The next morning, your routine resumes. You drink your bitter tea, you sweep your garden path, you bow to the passing guards. But you are not the same. You carry a poem beneath your robe. You memorise the names of the forgotten. You learn who to nod to and who to avoid. You know now that silence is not safety. It's surrender. And you're not ready to surrender yet. The walls remember. You used to think that was just something lonely women said to comfort themselves, as they faded into nothing. But now, as you trace your fingers along the uneven plaster of the quiet pavilion, you can feel it. Someone else stood where you are now. Someone else pressed their forehead to this wall in despair, or leaned against it with a stolen laugh, or whispered secrets too dangerous to say aloud. The palace absorbs everything. It forgets nothing, even if the people do. You begin looking more closely. There's a small carving beneath the window in your room, just behind the wooden lattice. 2 characters scratched into the frame with something sharp. Lucienne, a name, someone who came before you. Maybe another concubine. Maybe someone who died here. Maybe someone still alive, somewhere behind one of the 100 locked doors of this maze. You press your thumb against the carving and imagine her pressing hers in the same spot. You wonder what she looked like, how she spoke, whether she was brave, whether she left anything else behind. That's the thing about being in the forgotten wing of the palace. The noise fades, but the voices don't. They settle into the walls like dust, waiting for someone to stir them. The Paper Lotus women meet again 3 days later. Mingley leads you at dusk along the rear corridor past the Jade Garden, where only dried leaves crunch underfoot. This time the meeting is tense. One of the women, Lady Ping, has been moved. Not by request, not by promotion, just moved. Gone from the pavilion overnight, her belongings left behind. "She was seen near the records chamber," someone whispers. "She might have tried to take something." "She was caught," says another more bluntly. No one says what they're all thinking. She may not be alive. Lady Wen stands, pacing the room slowly, sleeves trailing like shadows. "We can't protect everyone," she says, "but we can remember them. That's how this begins, not with fire, with ink." You volunteer that night for your first task. A simple one. Copy names. Nothing dramatic, no secrets. Just a list of women you've known in passing who've vanished, been reassigned, or simply stopped appearing. You sit at your desk and write each name carefully, whispering them aloud as you go. Lady Anne, Lady Cixin, Lady Jen, Lady Rui, Ping, Lu, Shen. You don't know their full stories, but you know they mattered, and if you remember them, maybe they won't disappear completely. Here's your historical fact. Inside the Forbidden City, a full archive of harem residents was maintained. Birthplaces, families, ranks, promotions, demotions, illnesses, deaths. But many of these records were destroyed or tampered with during regime changes. Entire pages missing, names blacked out, dates rewritten. It was not unusual for concubines to be erased by decree. Now for the fringe fact. Some eunuchs kept their own records, hidden in hollowed-out brush handles or tucked behind loose bricks. In one famous case, a secret memoir was discovered decades later, detailing not the emperor's court decisions, but the daily lives and struggles of over 40 women in the inner court. It included poems, jokes, even descriptions of their favourite teas. And the scholarly debate, can memory be trusted in a system designed to erase? Some argue that all oral histories of the palace are romanticised, coloured by nostalgia or warped by fear. Others believe that memory, even when flawed, is the only defence against deliberate forgetting. That to remember is a kind of rebellion. You keep writing every night after that. Names, fragments, sketches, anything that might anchor these women to the world a little longer. Mingli helps. She brings ink and brush paper smuggled from the laundry wing. She listens when you read the names aloud, nods when you stumble over one you forgot you ever knew. And then something strange happens. A name appears on your list that you didn't write. Just one, near the top, neatly inked, with the same brush but not your hand. Lan, your name. You stare at it for a long time. You didn't add it. Mingli swears she didn't either. It's a warning, or a message, or an invitation. You carry the list to the next meeting, show it to the others. Lady Wen takes one glance, then folds it carefully and tucks it inside her sleeve. We're seen now, she says. It was always going to happen. No one says you should stop. In fact, you all agree to do more. The next task is riskier. Copy one of the registry scrolls. Real documents, real records. If they can get into the archive again, they can compare the official list with your own. See who's missing, who's been buried. You're not chosen for this task. You don't know whether to feel disappointed or relieved. Instead, you're assigned something else. The walls. Mingli helps you identify the symbols. Tiny marks hidden in plain sight across the pavilion. A cracked beam, a chipped tile, a red thread tied beneath a windowsill. They're everywhere. They tell a silent story. One is particularly strange. 3 vertical scratches inside your wardrobe door. They are not random. They match markings found in the south corridor, in the servants' quarters, and even carved lightly into the underside of the Emperor's garden gate. You begin copying them down. It becomes your new language. By the time a month passes, you've found more than 40. It's not just about memory anymore, it's a map. That night you sit on your bed, feet curled beneath you, ink drying on your fingers. Mingli brings you tea, silent as ever. You look up at her. Do you think they'll ever know? Who? The ones outside the world, the historians, anyone. She considers this, then shrugs. Does it matter? You look down at the page, covered in symbols, names, fragments of stories. No, you say, but it matters that we knew. That we lived. That we weren't just pretty faces that faded behind a screen. You hold up the page to the candlelight. The shadows dance across it. The walls watch, and for the first time in a long time you feel like they're smiling. The first time you hear laughter in the quiet pavilion, it startles you. Not a polite chuckle or a forced giggle, but actual laughter, full and sharp and defiant, echoing down the corridor like a sound that doesn't belong here. You drop the comb you were cleaning and stare at the door, half expecting a reprimand to follow, a eunuch's scolding voice or an older concubine's hiss to be quiet. But no one says anything, because that laugh came from someone who no longer cares about being punished. You find out later it was Lady Chow. She'd been in the pavilion longer than most, nearly a decade by some accounts, and never once had anyone heard her raise her voice. But something shifted. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe it was the discovery that her name had been misrecorded. She wasn't from Hubei, as the registry claimed, but from Anhui, a detail erased and replaced without explanation. She found her real birthplace scrawled in the back of an old inventory log by a paper lotus informant. I existed, she said, laughing, and they couldn't even get that right. It isn't funny, and yet it is. You begin to understand that memory, when weaponized, becomes something stronger than grief. It becomes joy, dangerous, uncontrollable joy, Not because things are better, but because someone noticed you were real, that you were here, that you mattered. That week, the Paper Lotus circle expands. 2 maids from the North Laundry join. One of them, Luli, is barely 16 and already speaks like a woman who's swallowed secrets sharp enough to slice through stone. She brings with her a list of old supply orders. Dates, room numbers, quantities. Hidden among them, a pattern of redirected resources. Medicines never delivered. Robes assigned to non-existent quarters. It's a trail if you know how to read it. Another member, silent for weeks, begins reciting poetry aloud during meetings. Not the classics, not the Emperor-approved verses carved into the garden stones. These are new, written in the margins of tea orders, embroidered into handkerchiefs. Tucked inside hollowed-out fan handles. You begin calling them the ghost poems, one reads. We were chosen to be beautiful cages, but we remember the air. You copy it into your scrollbook, carefully, reverently, and for the first time you write your full name beside it. Not just your title, not Lady of the 9th rank, just Lan. It feels like drawing breath after years underwater. Here's your historical fact. Even in the most rigid hierarchies of the Forbidden City, some women found ways to express their identities outside the roles they were assigned. Anonymous poetry, coded embroidery, and decorative motifs in personal items were often imbued with hidden meaning, small acts of rebellion in silk and ink. Now the fringe fact. A broken piece of lacquerware discovered in a sealed chamber of the palace bore a single etched phrase in ancient seal script. She wept, so I sang. The object, thought to be a writing box, was never claimed, but is believed by some scholars to be part of a hidden communication network among concubines during the 18th century. It's unclear whether the phrase referred to grief, revenge, or something in between. And the scholarly debate, were these creative acts deliberate rebellion, or coping mechanisms? Did the women know they were documenting something future generations might study? Or were they simply surviving the only way they could? Some argue that memory itself, when shaped by trauma, cannot be trusted. Others argue it's the only thing we can trust. You continue mapping the palace. You begin cross-referencing. Every servant's path, every door left ajar too often, every shift in guard rotations, the map becomes a web. Names and dates pinned to hallways and windows. You begin to see how the palace breathes, how it hides things, how it exposes them. One evening you discover a small crevice in the stone wall beside the laundry gate. Inside, a folded note. Here's not a list, not a poem, a question. Do you want to leave? It takes you hours to decide whether to answer. The risk is enormous. Writing even one word of agreement could mean exile, or worse, but silence feels heavier than anything else now. Oh. You write, yes, but only if the story comes with me. You slide the note back into the wall and wait. The next day nothing happens, nor the day after. But on the 3rd morning a red thread appears in your tea tray, coiled beneath the cup like a sleeping serpent. You tuck it into your sleeve. There are whispers now that the Empress is growing tired. Her regency, though strong, is built on constant vigilance. She cannot control everything. New servants arrive each week, messages move faster, walls crack, papers vanish, and the Paper Lotus has grown bold enough to consider what once would have been unthinkable. Escape. Not necessarily to freedom. The outside world is not gentle to women marked by the palace. But to leave with the records, to bring the names with you, to make sure someone beyond these walls knows what was done here. Lady Wen says it best one night, crouched beside the old brazier. We've already risked everything. If we stay, we vanish. If we leave, we might still vanish. But at least we'll have tried. Not all agree. Some want to remain, others are too afraid. You understand both. You've learnt that not everyone wants freedom. Some want to be remembered, and some just want peace. But you want both. So you begin preparing. You hide records inside hollowed brushes, wrap lists in silk thread and stuff them into old robe seams. You teach Mingli how to sew poems into the lining of pillows. You practice walking like a servant, shoulders hunched, eyes down, voice vanished. The lotus is ready to bloom. You're not sure when it will happen, but when it does, you'll walk through a door, any door, and carry the story with you. Because the palace only wins if no one remembers what it cost to survive it, and you will not let it win. Not quietly, not ever. It's nearly the end of the 7th moon when the storm comes, not in the sky, but in the palace itself. You wake to shouting, distant but frantic, echoing through the stone corridors like thunder trapped underground. Heavy footsteps pound past your window, too fast for ceremony, too loud for the usual emptiness of the quiet pavilion. Mingley peeks out the door and closes it immediately, her face white as plaster. "They're searching, Pong," she says, and suddenly, it's too soon. The escape plan was still half-formed, the route only recently finalised. The copies, the records, the smuggled names, some are hidden but others are still exposed. Somewhere along the line someone talked, or someone was forced to talk, and now the palace, always slow and cold like an ancient beast, has awakened. And it is angry. The search begins in the inner court. Eunuchs, guards, even low-ranked scribes are pulled in. They sweep quarters, dig through bundles of silk, empty brush cases, overturn mattress straw. The excuse is vague. Routine audits, they call it. But everyone knows. The walls are bleeding tueries. You hide the most important scroll inside your robe lining. The one with the complete list of vanished women, dates, notes, fragments of poetry, and your own name at the very bottom. A promise to yourself that if you vanish, you'll vanish loudly. Lady Wen calls an emergency meeting that night, but not in the usual place. The old brazier room is too exposed now. Instead, you meet in the abandoned bathhouse where the pipes hiss and the walls sweat. Half the women don't come. Of those who do, no one speaks above a whisper. "We need to scatter the documents," Wen says. "No more keeping things in one place. If one of us is taken, the others survive." Mingley nods. "I can take 2, hide them in the laundry baskets." Another woman, pale and shaking, agrees to tuck one inside the bone handle of her fan. You offer to take 3. Everyone stares. 3? Wen asks. "If I'm caught, I'm already dead," you say quietly. "Might as well be useful." No one argues. You leave the meeting with the scrolls bound tight against your ribs. You can feel the ink through the silk. It feels alive, like it's breathing against your skin. Here's your historical fact. In times of political upheaval in the Forbidden City, especially after an emperor's death or during succession crises, the palace was often purged of unauthorized documents. Eunuchs were instructed to destroy personal writings, letters, and anything that could be construed as subversive. Many concubines' memoirs and letters disappeared during these sweeps, leaving behind only government-sanctioned records. Now your fringe fact. One fragment of a concubine's diary dating back to the mid-1700s was found hidden inside a hollowed-out bamboo flute recovered during restoration. It detailed us a dream about escaping the palace by walking backward through every hall she'd ever entered. The dream ended at the entrance gate, where her own name had been carved into the stone and scraped away, and the scholarly debate are the stories of internal rebellion, like the so-called paper lotus, historical fact or well-crafted legend. Some argue that the level of coordination described in oral histories would have been impossible under palace surveillance. Others believe that small localized networks of resistance could have existed undetected, especially in peripheral wings like the quiet pavilion. The storm doesn't pass quickly. The searches continue for weeks. Lady Chiao is taken from her quarters one afternoon and never returns. You watch her go from your window. She doesn't cry, she simply turns her face toward the wind and walks. 2 days later, her room is cleared, her bedding burned. The walls remember. You carve her name into the frame behind your bed with a sewing needle. Chao. Then another name. Ping. Then yours. Lan. Not out of fear, out of clarity. If they erase you, you'll leave echoes. Mingley is silent during this time. Not cold, not scared, just focused. She sharpens her hairpins more often, checks the seams of your robe daily, boils water every night as if preparing for something inevitable. "Are you still with me?" you ask her one night. She looks up from her stitching. "I've always been with you." You nod. Because that's what loyalty is into the palace. Not blind obedience, but shared silence, shared danger, shared choice. Word arrives that the Empress is ill, or retiring. The phrasing depends on who you ask. Some say she's been poisoned. Others claim she's stepping aside to let the new Emperor rule without her shadow. Either way, the shift means chaos. Fewer guards, looser schedules, doors left open just a little too long. The paper lotus begins preparing again. Escape is back on the table. This time not through a tunnel or gate, but through a laundry delivery routed to the outer compound. A single cart pulled by a trusted eunuch who once served the Emperor's horse stables. One woman per basket. 1 scroll hidden per load. Only 3 can go, the others stay behind. Lady Wen volunteers. She has the most names. The original registry draft. Her documents are the spine of the story. Luli, the girl from the North Laundry, is next. She knows the routes. She's quick, small, sharp, and you when insists. It's your voice that made it real, she says. If any of us are going to speak the truth beyond these walls, it should be you. You want to say no. You want to give your place to someone else. But you can't pretend anymore. You want to go. You want to live. So you accept. The night before the escape, you sit in your tiny room and unroll the jade bird from its cloth. You've kept it hidden for so long that you almost forgot how detailed it is. Each feather etched with care, each curve delicate, fluid. A gift from a man who never really saw you, and yet somehow saw enough. You whisper to the bird because there's no one else to tell. I'm not leaving this place. I'm carrying it with me. Then you tuck it into the seam of your robe, over your heart. The morning arrives cloudless and breathless. Mingli helps you into the cart. She doesn't cry, she just pulls the cover over your head and presses her palm against the side. You press yours back, then you're moving. Not fast, not loud, just steady. Every bump in the stone path echoes through your body. Every creak of the cart sounds like fate shifting its weight. When the cart stops, you hold your breath, and you wait. Then a voice, quiet, urgent. Out. Now! You push back the lid, squinting into the sunlight. It burns your eyes. The real sky, the real world. You made it. But more importantly, the story did. You never expected freedom to feel so quiet. The city beyond the Forbidden City isn't what you imagined. Not the bustling dreamscape whispered between palace girls late at night. Not the golden promise of merchants and poets and riverboats. It's rougher, colder, grey with soot and hurried with survival. You're not even sure where you are exactly. The cart wound through enough alleys and servant gates to lose any sense of direction. But when you stepped out onto that cobbled street, with the scrolls pressed beneath your robe and the weight of 1,000 names in your hands, you felt something unfamiliar. Space. Not safety. Not yet. But space. Room to breathe. Luli is already gone. She vanished the moment her feet touched dirt, swallowed by the alleyways like a ghost set loose. She knew her route, memorized it in reverse. Lady Wen walks beside you now, Semner, face shadowed by the borrowed linen hood pulled low over her brow. She's calmer than you are, though you both tremble with every step. You sleep the first night in a cramped courtyard home owned by a widow loyal to Wen's family. The house smells of broth and old paper. You're given rice and ginger tea and told not to open the windows. You don't ask questions. You sleep with your scrolls tucked beneath your blanket, your fingers wrapped around the jade bird like a talisman. In the morning, the widow gives you a comb. You've earned your own again, she says, her voice thick with smoke. You look at it. It's plain, wooden, but it's yours. Not a gift from the Emperor, not assigned by the palace, just yours. Here's your historical fact. Escaped or released concubines from the Forbidden City were expected to live quietly. Many entered Buddhist nunneries, while others were absorbed into distant relatives' homes, never to speak of court life again. But a few, through hidden support networks or underground writing circles, became silent chroniclers of what had happened behind the red walls. Now your fringe fact. There are rumours that a small circle of red-robed widows, former palace women, secretly published cautionary poetry during the late Qing period. Though never proven, several banned texts contain idioms and metaphors linked closely with life in the inner court, including veiled references to missing concubines and record tampering. The scrolls are unsigned, but scholars suspect they were passed between tea houses and underground bookshops by women dressed in mourning red. And the scholarly debate. Were escaped concubines really able to share their stories without consequence? Or were these tales romantic inventions layered over the ugly truth of erasure? Some believe the so-called testimonies were fabricated later by reformers seeking to criticize imperial rule. Others argue that the truth must have come from somewhere, and who better to speak it than the women no one thought would survive? You and Wen spend the next few weeks moving carefully through the city. You sleep in storage rooms, temples, even once inside a dye shop warehouse that smelled of fermented indigo. Each stop is arranged through the quiet network Wen's family once kept, a crumbling lineage of nobility and exiles and former scribes who still remember their debts. You begin to read the records aloud at night, one name at a time. Ping, Chao, Xin, Rui, Jen, Lan. Wen lights incense as you speak. Mingli's name is the last on your list. You cry when you read it, not because she's dead, because you don't know if she is, but because you had to leave her behind. You write her a letter anyway. You fold it into the shape of a lotus and place it in the river the next morning. "Tell her I remember," you whisper. The wind takes it. You continue gathering the pieces. Your robe is unstitched, the hidden lists pulled from their seams. You gather the scrolls, the carved symbols, the ghost poems copied by candlelight. You paste them together on fresh parchment with shaking hands and a steady spine. It's a book, a raw one, unedited, ungilded, book of breath and memory and grief. You title it simply The Names They Forgot, and you begin asking where to take it. Wen says there are still sympathetic scholars in the outer provinces, former court historians who retired in protest when the Empress took full regency, others who were forced out for documenting unauthorized emotion. You travel to one, an old man with sunken eyes and a spine bent like an overused scroll. He reads your work in silence. When he finishes, he lights a candle and says, "These are real." You nod. They were always real. He presses the scrolls to his chest and says nothing else. The city continues on around you, but something shifts. Quietly, like a muscle that's been tensed for too long, finally loosening. You no longer flinch when carts pass you. You begin to wear your hair without pins again. You eat soup without glancing over your shoulder. You feel, for the first time, like someone who might belong in the world. You still keep the jade bird near. It sits on the window ledge of a borrowed attic room, watching the sky change from grey to gold and back again. Its wings are frozen, in mid-beat, as if it's not sure whether to fly or stay. One afternoon, a young girl finds you in the market. She doesn't say her name, just presses a folded paper into your hand before vanishing. Inside, a poem. They never taught us how to leave, so we taught ourselves, and now they can't stop us. There is no signature, but you know it was meant for you. The paper lotus is still alive, scattered, but breathing. You burn the paper that night, not to destroy it, but to release it. To let it ride smoke into the world and find someone new. Maybe another girl. Maybe someone still inside. Maybe a historian, long after you're gone. Because that's the thing about stories. They're fireproof if you pass them fast enough. You and Wen sit on a hillside days later, watching the city stretch out like a new map. Neither of you speak at first. There's no need. Finally, she says, "Do you regret it?" You shake your head. "I regret not doing it sooner." She smiles. "Then let's do it again." You turn to her. "What?" "Let's go find the others. The ones who are still locked in silken silence." "You want to go back?" She laughs, soft and dangerous. "No, I want to keep going forward until back doesn't exist." You hold out your hand. She takes it. And together you begin walking. Not as concubines, not as ghosts, but as the only thing the Forbidden City never truly planned for. Survivors who speak. The road out of Beijing is wide and dusty, lined with weather-worn trees that lean slightly eastward like they've been bowing to the capital for too long. You and Wen walk with purpose now, not hidden in carts or deking behind alleys, but upright, visible. Two women with calloused feet and ink-stained hands, who no longer belong to anyone but themselves. The scrolls are wrapped in oiled cloth and tucked into a satchel you carry close to your chest, heavier than any jewel box you ever held in the Forbidden City. You pass villages where people speak in dialects you don't fully understand. Children stare, old men squint, but no one asks questions. Two women on foot are just a breeze in a wide world, unimportant to most, invisible to many. And for once, that's a blessing. At night, you sleep in tea-house lofts, behind shrines, or in borrowed rooms above dusty apothecaries. You eat what you can afford, mostly flatbread, boiled eggs, and, when lucky, oranges. Wen trades calligraphy lessons for meals. You recite poetry to children in a return for rice. It's not elegant, but it is free. Sometimes you see signs of the Empire out here. Military posts, tax collectors, messengers galloping past with scrolls bearing the Emperor's seal. But the farther you travel, the less they matter. Out here, people care more about reign than rank, more about harvests than titles. When they ask your names, you give your real ones, just Lan and Wen. No ranks, no lady before your name, just who you are. One evening in a village near the mountains, you meet a teacher. He runs a small school for boys and girls, rare even in these times, and invites you to sit and speak. You tell a story. Not the whole truth, but close enough. You say, "Once there was a city made of silence, and inside it girls were taught to become shadows." The teacher listens. So do the children. Afterward he asks, "And did any of them escape?" You smile. "Yes, but they didn't run. They carried the city with them so that it couldn't disappear." He nods like he understands more than he's saying. He offers to copy some of your records to help preserve them. He has ink, paper, time. You agree. Over the next 3 days, the two of you work together at a low wooden table beneath a persimmon tree, your fingers stiff with ink, your breath visible in the cool mountain air. He copies with careful precision, pausing only to ask about characters he doesn't recognize. You explain the symbols, the ghost poems, the names written in code. Wen adds new ones as they come to her in memory. Servants, musicians, girls who never made it past the training halls. You say them aloud together like prayers. By the end of the 3rd day, there are 4 full copies. 1 stays with the teacher. 1 goes with Wen. 1 will be buried in a shrine up the hill, sealed in oilskin inside a clay pot. The 4th stays with you. Because there's 1 more place you need to go. Here's your historical fact. In rare cases, concubines who survived the fall of dynasties or major regime shifts were known to travel anonymously through rural regions, offering literacy education or healing services. Oral histories suggest that some carried imperial knowledge and traditions, passing it along in subtle ways, cloaked in folk tales and nursery rhymes. Now the fringe fact. A traveller's log from the 19th century mentions a pair of women who carried a scroll written entirely in code, travelling from village to village under the guise of peddlers. The author never learned their names, but noted the symbol they carved near each resting place, a lotus made of 7 brushstrokes, and the scholarly debate. Did escaped concubines really have the power to shape historical record from the outside? Or were their stories only preserved because someone else chose to write them down? Some scholars argue the very act of survival was political. Others caution against romanticising these women, pointing to the many who are never heard from again. You return to the city after 6 months. Not to the Forbidden City itself, but to the outer ring, where scholars gather, where records are stored and sometimes forgotten. You don't wear court robes or a veil. You walk like a woman with nowhere to hide. Wen joins you for the final step, delivering the last scroll to a man known only by reputation, a historian of exiles, one who catalogues what the Empire chooses to omit. You wait in a tea house as he reads. You drink quietly, heart ticking like a drum. When he finally looks up, his eyes are wet. "Who wrote this?" he asks. "All of us," you reply. "And none of us." He nods. He understands. He promises to make copies. Quietly. Carefully. He knows how dangerous it still is. That night, you and Wen sit by the river, watching lanterns drift in the water, small flames held steady by paper and hope. You light one yourself, but instead of writing a wish, you write a name. Mingly, Wen does the same. You both let them go. The river carries them, glowing away from the city toward whatever comes next. And as you watch the light flicker against the black water, you realise something. You never really escaped the Forbidden City. You transformed it, from a prison into a story, from silence into a voice, from loss into memory, and now, wherever someone remembers, even a single name, the palace loses a little of its power. Here, at last, is the truth. You were never just a concubine. You were a witness. You were the record. And you live to write it down. Now the sky above you stretches without walls. It's not painted in lacquer reds or held in by golden eaves. It doesn't need permission to thunder, to shine, to change. You sit beneath it. Older now, quieter in some ways, louder in others. You've lived through a system designed to consume women like you and erase the parts it couldn't use. But you somehow weren't erased. The scrolls have travelled far. Some ended up in scholars' hands, others probably burned, buried or lost. But even the lost ones mattered, each a thread pulled from the web of lies the palace spun to protect itself. And the ones that survived? They're whispered about now, quoted, taught sometimes by daring teachers under the breath of curriculum. Not everyone believes them. That's fine. You don't need them to. You still carry one in your satchel, creased at the corners, soft at the fold. You've read it 100 times, not to remember but to feel. the texture of survival, the sound of your own name where it used to be forbidden. Wen has settled in a small river town teaching girls to read. You write letters to each other in the margins of books in poems too layered for outsiders to untangle. Sometimes you meet by the coast. She always brings oranges. And sometimes when you're walking through the marketplace or down a narrow village lane, a young girl will ask where you're from. You smile and say, "Once I lived in a palace that forgot me." Then you hand her a lotus. Not a real one, just paper, just enough. And she carries it with her, because that's how memory moves, quietly, hand to hand, flame to flame. You didn't survive to be remembered. You survived so they wouldn't be forgotten.